Humanity had waged a desperate, bloody war against the catastrophic 6 demon gods. These terrifying beings sought nothing but the absolute destruction of the entire world. Among them was the most horrifying and destructive of all, the demon god of the Sea of Ruin. Though the heroes fought with everything they had, the cost of the war was unimaginably high. Most of the Earth's surface had already been completely swallowed by a toxic sea of death. Humanity was teetering on the very edge of complete and utter extinction. Miraculously, they managed to push through and finally slay the demon god. But as the dust settled on the battlefield, a crushing realization set in. Why did this so-called victory feel exactly like a devastating defeat? The surviving heroes who bravely fought on the front lines were entirely wiped out. Even the colossal Tower of Heroes, the magical pillar that sustained the earth, had crumbled to dust. And worst of all, the cursed Sea of Ruin flat out refused to vanish. Even after its creator's death, the corrupted dark waters continued to relentlessly rise. It rampaged wildly, thrashing against the broken remnants of civilization like an uncontrollable lunatic. Sitting amidst the apocalyptic wreckage was Lee Se-hun, the world's last blacksmith. Bleeding and exhausted, his gaze shifted to the only other figures left alive in this barren wasteland. Big talk for a bastard who was faking sick and lying down the whole time, a voice rasped out. This was Yom Sung-ha, a vicious fighter infamously known across the world as the Mad Dog. Beside him was the explosive dog, Louise Valent, barely able to keep her bloodshot eyes open. She scoffed, accusing Se-hun of just wanting a free ride by siding with the Legion. The third survivor was Amir Singh, the ice dog glaring weakly at the battered blacksmith. Se-hun just smirked through his immense pain, refusing to back down from their insults. He quickly reminded them that they would have died ages ago without the superior gear he had crafted. Sung-ha cursed him out, aggressively demanding another round of fighting despite his broken body. These 3 defiant warriors standing before Se-hun were the legendary 3 dogs. During the long, grueling war, they had firmly sided with neither humanity nor the pandemonium. They were true wild cards, moving only as they pleased and answering to absolutely no one. Coveting only their own gain, they were the ultimate gray zone opportunists. They were selfish, greedy, and utterly ruthless to the core. Yet, ironically, their selfish nature allowed them to survive until the very end of the apocalypse. And ultimately, it was these 3 outcasts who played the biggest role in ending the brutal war. Se-hun couldn't help but wonder about how things could have gone differently. If these stubborn bastards had just lent their overwhelming strength a little sooner, could the tragic, world-ending outcome of this war have been prevented? But it was far too late for any regrets now. As he looked at their battered, bloodied bodies, he softly asked if any of them were going to make it. Sung-ha collapsed to his knees, groaning that his insides were completely crushed. The fight was truly over, and the Grim Reaper was finally coming to collect. Louise slumped heavily against the rubble, admitting she was in the exact same hopeless situation. The blood wouldn't stop flowing from her wounds, a lethal lingering effect of a demonic curse. Amir coughed violently, revealing that his heart had been cleanly pierced during the battle. He closed his eyes, knowing that he was completely done for too. Se-hun chuckled bitterly, the hollow sound echoing across the empty ruins. See, you should have helped out way sooner. The 3 dogs had ignored the cries of the world just to save their own skins. And yet, they still met the exact same tragic fate in the end. They were high maintenance and incredibly stubborn right down to their bitter final breaths. Watching their life forces fade, Se-hun scolded them one last time. He quietly muttered that they should have treated their gear with a little more respect. Their legendary weapons were now completely shattered and ruined beyond repair. He couldn't even salvage or reuse the broken scraps now if he wanted to. With heavy, pained breaths, Se-hun pushed himself up from the concrete debris. He slowly gathered the broken remains of the weapons he had once forged for them. Dragging his battered body across the cracked earth, he approached their lifeless forms. One by one, he drove the shattered blades and staves deep into the solid ground. These broken weapons would have to be enough to serve as their lonely tombstones. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the makeshift graves in the dead world. "This is the last time I'll be doing this," he muttered to the empty, chilling air. The crushing loneliness of being the final human alive pressed down heavily on his shoulders. The deafening roar of the chaotic sea grew louder, ready to swallow the last patch of land. He slowly turned around, facing the terrifying tidal wave of ruin looming over the horizon. "Is it my turn soon?" he whispered, fully embracing his inevitable end. But before the dark, corrupted waves could take him, Se-hun raised his trembling hand. He decided to use the very last ounces of his remaining flickering mana. He fiercely activated his unique skill, the Blacksmith of Bonds. A bright blue light surged from his palm as the system initiated a deep bond extraction. This powerful skill extracted special ore from targets with whom a strong bond had been formed. The effects and absolute quality of the ore always varied based on the depth of the bond. With no one else left, he targeted himself, pulling the very essence of his soul out into his hand. However, whenever he used this skill on his own body in the past, he always ended up getting something infinitely worse than common iron ore. A colorless, empty bondstone materialized in his scarred palm. He stared at the worthless rock, letting out a deep, truly defeated sigh. It would have been nice if he had awakened a better, stronger ability sooner in his life. But even if there was absolutely nothing inside it, it was all he had left. He gripped his trusted blacksmith's hammer tightly in his other hand. The familiar heavy weight of the tool brought a small sense of comfort to his final moments. The deafening roar of the Sea of Ruin crashed closer, threatening to obliterate everything in sight. For years he had heard a strange rhythmic sound constantly ringing in his ears. Was it the sound of this terrifying sea all along? Or was it the hidden waves of destiny he had always been hearing? One thing was absolutely certain to the dying, exhausted blacksmith. Whenever that mysterious sound echoed in his mind, it pushed his raw focus beyond imagination. Sparks flew wildly as he brought the heavy hammer down on his own colorless bondstone. With every single agonizing strike, he poured the last remnants of his life force into the useless ore. A blinding, intense light suddenly erupted from the makeshift forge of his own bare hands. He struck the metal with everything he had, violently defying the apocalypse crashing around him. He desperately hoped that maybe, just maybe, he could make something truly good this one final time. Even if it was just forged from his own empty, pathetic, and lonely soul. But as the glowing light finally faded, the result was heartbreakingly plain. A simple, completely unremarkable dagger rested silently in his battered hand. There was no hidden power, no explosive aura, no special ability to the very end. "It's fucking plain," he cursed out loud, gripping the hilt tight in sheer frustration. The massive tidal wave of dark, corrupted water finally eclipsed the dying sky above him. Rather than being swept away and mercilessly killed by those cursed toxic waves, Sehun smiled like an absolute madman, refusing to give the sea the ultimate satisfaction. "I'll end it with my own hands," he roared fiercely against the rushing tide. He tightly gripped the plain dagger and plunged it straight into his own chest. As his life immediately faded and he sank into the dark abyss, a sudden realization hit him. The mysterious sound of waves he had heard since he first awakened his magic, it was the terrifying Sea of Ruin itself, calling out to him this whole time. As his consciousness slipped away, he was filled with deep, soul-crushing regret. If only he had hammered for others even a little bit earlier in his life. Or maybe he should have tried harder to convince the three dogs earlier to join the desperate fight. Suddenly, amidst the suffocating darkness of death, a glowing blue system window shattered the silence. A crisp notification rang out. The imagery of armament has manifested. Another window rapidly followed, flashing brightly in his fading watery vision. Imagery skill return to origin is released. A brilliant flash of blinding light consumed the endless dark, completely reversing the flow of time itself. The sounds of the apocalypse were instantly replaced by the heavy clamor of a bustling, lively forge. "Hey!" a loud, authoritative voice barked out, completely shattering Sehun's trance. An angry instructor glared down at him, furiously asking why Cadet Lee Se-hun was spacing out during the entrance exam. Realizing his final weapon had miraculously sent him exactly 31 years into the past, Se-hun clenched his fists, determined to seize this second chance and protect everything. Se-hun knew that this life would be different, and it would all begin by passing Babel Academy's grueling entrance exam. His ultimate goal was to cross paths with the legendary Three Hounds, and this was the only way to make it happen. Inside the sweltering forge, the rhythmic striking of his hammer immediately caught the attention of the examiners. His movements appeared slow and deliberate, but every single strike landed with absolute, unwavering precision. The clear, ringing sound of metal echoing through the workshop was completely devoid of any wasted effort. The watching professor couldn't help but acknowledge the sheer, undeniable quality of the young man's forging skill. The other candidates paused their own work, staring in absolute disbelief at the flawless finish taking shape on his anvil. Whispers broke out among the stunned crowd as they realized a mere candidate was crafting something of such high caliber. The examiners exchanged knowing glances, convinced they had just found the crown jewel of this year's applicants. If he simply turned in the blade exactly as it was, he was guaranteed to pass the exam right then and there. But as Si-hoon stared down at his nearly finished work, a wave of bitter disappointment washed over him. To anyone else, it was a masterpiece, but to his trained eyes, it was a glaring reminder of how far he still had to go. There was absolutely no way he could allow a piece of trash like this to see the light of day. Without a second thought, he raised his heavy hammer high into the air. With a deafening crash, he brought it down, violently shattering the very blade that would have secured his future. Shards of metal scattered across the floor, leaving the entire room frozen in breathless, absolute shock. The silence was suddenly shattered by an outraged scream from one of the observing students, furious at the blatant disrespect. The boy demanded to know if Se-hoon thought the sacred art of blacksmithing was some kind of twisted joke. Even the seasoned professor was taken aback, his eyes narrowing at the audacious display playing out before him. The furious student continued to yell, completely unable to comprehend why anyone would destroy such a perfect weapon in front of an examiner. Ignoring the outrage, Si-hoon calmly turned to the professor and boldly requested the remaining materials to start over. The angry student scoffed, pointing out the sheer insanity of the request when there were only 40 minutes left on the clock. But the professor, sensing something uniquely dangerous about this candidate, silenced the room and agreed to bring the materials himself. Se-hoon gave a firm, unwavering nod, completely unfazed by the impossible time limit hanging over his head. He knew perfectly well that handing in his previous work would have been an unforgivable insult to his own pride. The professor crossed his arms, curious to see what this arrogant yet wildly talented boy could possibly pull off under pressure. He gave Si-hoon the green light, silently challenging him to show them what he was truly capable of. As the fresh flames roared to life, a heavy, frustrating realization settled in Se-hoon's mind. In his current, unrefined body, achieving a truly perfect forging was mathematically and physically impossible. He was dangerously short on mana, lacking in physical strength, and practically out of time. Backed into a corner, he knew there was only one reckless, desperate option left to salvage the exam. The onlookers gasped in horror as they realized what he was doing with the raw, highly volatile ignition stones. He was aggressively pouring his own magical energy directly into the unstable materials. Panic erupted in the workshop as students screamed that the stones were going to violently explode and kill them all. They begged the professor to intervene, terrified that the reckless fool was going to blow the entire room to pieces. A massive, blinding surge of magical fire erupted from the furnace, sending a wave of blistering heat through the academy. The terrified students practically begged for an extinguisher, bracing their bodies for the inevitable blast. But the professor calmly held out a hand, commanding everyone to stand down and simply watch the flames. He reprimanded the panicked students, pointing out that a true blacksmith should be able to read the flow of the fire. Se-hoon stood amidst the roaring, multicolored flames, a confident smirk playing across his face as he flawlessly executed an ancient technique. Against all odds, the intense magical reaction didn't trigger an explosion, but instead completely stabilized around the anvil. The students watched in dumbfounded silence as the raging inferno wrapped perfectly around the metal. A collective gasp echoed through the room when they noticed the raw ingot was physically changing its color. The professor finally understood. The boy was using a high-level resonance technique to drastically alter the metal's core properties. By boosting the firepower to its absolute limit, he was artificially accelerating the entire forging process. It was a brilliant, highly dangerous gamble that would significantly cut down the time he needed to shape the blade. But even with this miraculous technique, the brutal reality of the clock remained entirely unforgiving. With only 30 minutes left, the margin for error had completely vanished. The professor silently acknowledged the boy's genius, but remained skeptical if sheer talent could beat the ticking clock. Se-hoon brought his hammer down in a frantic, desperate rhythm, every single strike pushing his body closer to total collapse. Despite the mounting exhaustion, his focus remained incredibly sharp, his eyes locked onto the glowing metal. The intricate layers of the blade began to form, folding flawlessly under the immense pressure of his relentless strikes. But suddenly, the magical protective aura surrounding his hands flickered and violently shattered. His mana reserves had completely dried up, leaving his bare flesh entirely exposed to the blistering radiant heat. Se-hoon gritted his teeth as a sharp pain flared up his arms, violently cursing his current pathetic physical state. He made a silent vow that the very second this exam was over, he would undergo torturous training to rebuild his shattered stamina. But right now, in this critical moment, he couldn't afford to waste even a single fraction of a second. Ignoring the agonizing burns tearing through his skin, he tightened his brutal grip on the heavy hammer. Blood began to seep from his overworked hands, sizzling violently as it dripped onto the scorching hot metal. He forced his screaming muscles to keep moving, pushing his mortal body far beyond its absolute limits. The harsh voice of the examiner echoed through the sweltering room, announcing that only 10 minutes remained. Sehun's breathing grew ragged, his vision blurring slightly from the overwhelming exhaustion and intense heat. The countdown continued without mercy, 3 minutes left to finalize the weapon that would determine his entire future. As the 1-minute warning blared, he made his final, most critical adjustments to the blade's razor-sharp edge. With a sharp, decisive movement, he plunged the glowing weapon into the cooling trough just as the final bell rang out. A glowing blue system window instantly materialized before his eyes, confirming the successful creation of his new weapon. A second notification chimed in, rewarding him with the rare Artisan of Flame skill for his miraculous death-defying feat. The judgment result flashed across the screen, calculating the weapon's official grade based on its raw power. It was a high-grade weapon, a beautifully curved blade deeply engraved with the concentrated power of 5 elemental flames. The weapon perfectly reflected the boundless, terrifying potential of the blacksmith, who had poured his very soul into its creation. The loudmouth student from earlier practically burst into tears of shock as the final, unbelievable grade was announced. He couldn't comprehend how anyone had actually pulled off a high-grade forge under such impossible, self-imposed conditions. The professor quickly shut down the boy screaming, though he himself was deeply unsettled by what he had just witnessed. Shortly after the exam concluded, Sehun was called directly into Professor Kim In-cheol's private office. The professor sat behind his desk, studying the boy and asking if he was finally satisfied with the weapon he had submitted. Sehun gave a calm, non-committal response, making it explicitly clear that his ambitions reached far higher than a mere entrance exam. Leaning forward, the professor dropped his strict facade and brutally told Sehun that he would be better off withdrawing his application. He shockingly confessed that despite Babel's overwhelming global reputation, their smithing department was actually a complete miserable failure. Sehun remained entirely unfazed by the warning, coldly revealing that he already knew the department was destined to be shut down in exactly 8 years. The professor assumed the boy would leave for the rival Vulcan Academy, but Sehun simply smirked, boldly declaring that Babel would become the undisputed greatest in the world simply because he was enrolling there. The Grand Babel Academy stood as the pinnacle of education, but for Sehun, it was merely the starting line for his ultimate conquest. Standing before Professor Kim In-cheol, he boldly rejected the idea that any other academy could be better, claiming he would make Babel the greatest just by being there. With absolute, unwavering confidence, he declared that no student in existence would ever surpass him. The veteran professor sat back, silently assessing the young man's seemingly ridiculous ambition. Leaning in, he challenged Sehun, asking if he even comprehended the brutal gauntlet required to become the top freshman. Without missing a beat, Sehun broke down the ruthless system, detailing how every department's top 2 candidates clashed in a relentless extra exam. He knew the academy divided its massive student body into 3 fierce, hyper-competitive main faculties. Combat, support, and technical, each would push their absolute elite forward to fight for dominance. From that bloodbath of talent, only one supreme candidate from each faculty would survive the culling. And finally, those 3 titans would wage war against each other to crown the single greatest freshman in all of Babel. With dozens of branching departments, the competition was a relentless meat grinder of pure talent. Whoever claimed that final, glorious spot was recognized as the absolute, undisputed prodigy of their generation. The professor tightly clasped his hands, the harsh weight of reality settling into his bones. Dropping his formal title, he spoke directly as a senior blacksmith, delivering the bitter truth the boy needed to hear. He warned Sehun that even if he clawed his way to the top, achieving true success in Babel's failing smithing department was nearly impossible. He urged the boy to transfer to Vulcan Academy instead, genuinely believing it was the only place his immense talent wouldn't be wasted. But rather than feeling insulted, a warm smile spread across Sehun's face, touched that a senior cared more about a student's future than academy pride. Still, he refused to back down, fiercely stating that his environment didn't dictate his limits. He was staying right here. The sheer unapologetic arrogance of claiming he would become the best no matter the circumstances finally cracked the professor's serious demeanor. Amused by the boy's unrelenting fire, the professor extended his hand, officially accepting the monstrous rookie under his wing. The moment their hands locked, a strange spark of energy violently surged between them. A brilliant holographic interface materialized around Se-hoon, confirming a newly formed bond with the professor. The system initialized flawlessly, instantly elevating their connection to level 1. A surge of pure, crackling energy radiated from Se-hoon's eyes as his unique God-tier ability forcefully activated. Reaching out, he began to literally extract the physical manifestation of their new relationship directly from the professor's soul. A chunk of raw, shimmering energy materialized, hovering weightlessly above his glowing palm. The ethereal light condensed, solidifying into a heavy textured object. It was a piece of fire-joined iron, a rare wood-like metal capable of sealing intense flames within its very structure. While not a legendary artifact, the high-grade ore proved his regressor abilities were functioning perfectly. Later that night, the quiet town outside stood in stark contrast to the massive storm brewing inside Se-hoon's mind. Sitting alone in the dim light of his room, he carefully inspected the mystical ore he had pulled from his mentor. Bond extraction was an unparalleled skill that quantified human relationships and forged them into entirely new materials. But as he analyzed the ore, the fatal flaw in his current condition became painfully obvious. With his bond levels sitting this low, the skill was clunky, awkward, and barely usable in a life-or-death battle. And to make matters infinitely worse, pulling up his own status window was like staring at a death sentence. Compared to the genetic monsters entering Babel, his physical stats were brutally, laughably pathetic. He let out a heavy sigh, the crushing exhaustion of starting over from the absolute bottom washing over him. But as the initial frustration faded, his eyes sharpened with a cold, terrifying determination. Complaining was useless. Just being given a second chance to fix the past was a miracle he swore never to squander. He knew exactly what was coming, the impending doom that would wipe out not just humanity, but entire stars. The horrific demon legion was destined to descend, turning the universe into an apocalyptic slaughterhouse. 6 catastrophic demon gods would soon rise, driving humanity to the absolute brink of extinction. To stop that nightmare from becoming reality, he couldn't afford to be merciful or picky about his methods. He needed overwhelming power, and he needed it before the timeline began to shift. The very first step was aggressively securing weapons and crucial memories while the future was still predictable. Suddenly, a bright flash interrupted his thoughts as the system flared to life once more. Reaching Bond Level 1 had secretly unlocked a brand new, highly anticipated ability, Bond Engraving. His eyes widened in shock as the final, crucial piece of his early game strategy fell perfectly into his lap. 1 week later, the towering, majestic spires of Babel Academy welcomed its newest batch of elites. Throwing his jacket over his shoulder, Se-hoon confidently strolled into the lion's den, ready to completely flip the hierarchy. Inside the faculty office, the atmosphere was suffocating as the vice dean of Borsippa paced the floor in annoyance. Michael Barmuth coldly reminded everyone in the room that the crucial extra exam was only 10 minutes away. The other instructors nervously sweated under the pressure, terrified of angering the executives any further. Se-hoon calmly observed the hostile environment, the pieces rapidly clicking together in his head. Professor Kim hadn't just warned him about the department's poor funding, the smithing faction was actively despised by the academy's higher-ups. The vice dean aggressively glared at the new cadet, his eyes filled with total contempt for the boy's relaxed attitude. But Se-hoon simply stood his ground in silence, completely unfazed by the intense killing intent directed at him. With a condescending smirk, the vice dean prepared to ruthlessly chew the rookie out. But the heavy sound of sharp footsteps suddenly echoed through the room, forcing everyone's blood to run cold. Se-hoon instantly snapped his head around, genuinely caught off guard by the overwhelming presence entering the room. Even the arrogant vice dean immediately stiffened, his condescending attitude evaporating the second he saw her. For the first time since returning to the past, Se-hoon's ironclad composure completely shattered. Rolling into the room with terrifying elegance and an intimidating glare, the true apex predator of the academy had arrived. It was Ruyuan-ha, the supreme faculty head of Borsippa, radiating an aura that demanded absolute submission. Se-hoon's brain completely short-circuited, a massive wave of sheer panic washing over his mind. Of all the terrifying entities in the universe, she was the absolute last person he expected to face right now, leaving him internally screaming as his academy life instantly turned into a nightmare. The towering Babel Academy held many secrets, but this was one he truly didn't expect to uncover today. Sitting right in front of him, exuding an overwhelming aura, was none other than the faculty head. He knew her well from a distant past life, long before his regression ever took place. She was Ryu-un-ha, the infamous S-rank hero whose name commanded fear across the globe. Her title was the Weapon Eater, a terrifying moniker earned through countless bloody battles. She possessed a unique, devastating skill that allowed her to literally devour weapons whole. By consuming them, she amplified her own explosive power to absolute godlike levels. In his past life, she wasn't just a hero, she was a longtime regular who did business with him for years. The heavy memories of their past dealings flooded his mind in an instant. Standing in the pouring rain, battered and bruised, he remembered the bitter taste of total defeat. He couldn't help but sigh, deeply regretting the day he let her consume his absolute favorite weapon. But there was no time to dwell on the past. The present demanded his complete and utter focus. The imposing Vice Dean's voice suddenly echoed through the massive exam hall, cutting through the silence. The strict rules for the ultimate crafting test were finally being laid out for the competitors. The two remaining students had exactly 60 minutes on the giant ticking clock. Within that single grueling hour, they were tasked with forging a fully functional weapon from scratch. The catch was brutal. It had to perfectly synergize with the results of their previous exhausting exam. The Vice Dean casually ignited a ball of pure elemental energy in his bare hand to demonstrate. A massive pile of raw, unrefined ores was then dramatically presented to the students. They were given absolute freedom to choose any materials they wanted from the staggering stockpile. But the pressure was immense, as two titans of the academy would be judging their every single move. Faculty head Ryu Unha watched with piercing eyes, expecting nothing short of absolute perfection. Beside her sat Vice Dean Michael Barmuth, radiating a stern, unforgiving, and calculated aura. The expectation was crystal clear: craft something worthy or face total, irreversible humiliation. The tension in the massive room was thick enough to cut with a dull blade. The true test of a crafter wasn't just in the hammering, but in the precise, delicate manipulation of pure mana. Only by resonating with pure mana could one keep the volatile elemental energies from completely running wild. Suddenly, a disrespectful scoff broke the heavy silence of the exam hall. A blonde student smirked, arrogantly adjusting his expensive, custom-made apron. He boldly questioned if staring blankly at the materials would magically make someone stronger. The sharp provocation was obvious, aimed squarely and intentionally at the protagonist. Unfazed, he calmly turned his head, asking if the snide remark was actually directed at him. The blonde student sneered, making it abundantly clear there was no one else he considered so far beneath him. This arrogant, grinning challenger was none other than Hans Barmuth. The realization hit instantly. The striking facial resemblance was impossible to ignore. Hans was the golden child, the direct pampered son of the very examiner evaluating them today. Michael Barmuth, the calculating Vice Dean, was his own father. The sheer audacity of the setup made the protagonist internally scoff at the blatantly rigged system. Hans noticed the realization finally dawning on his opponent's face and smiled wickedly. He reveled in his overwhelming privilege, undeniably proud to be the untouchable son of the Vice Dean. The stage was perfectly set for what everyone assumed would be a one-sided slaughter. On one side stood a mere commoner, possessing the absolute lowest family status and mana reserves among all the freshmen. On the other stood the arrogant heir to the prestigious Barmuth clan, a legendary house of alchemic smithing. Hans boasted a monstrous, overflowing mana pool that easily rivaled the top students of the entire second year. To every outside observer in the room, the result of this grueling exam was already completely set in stone. Hans confidently reached his hand into the pile of materials, his eyes locked dead on his prize. He effortlessly pulled out a heavy chunk of lazulite and a flawless piece of Hainam jade. The Vice Dean watched his son's quick selection with a barely concealed smirk of immense pride. These were top-tier attribute materials, practically overflowing with high-capacity fluid water elemental mana. While water mana was notoriously sensitive to fire and tricky to refine, Hans had a massive ace up his sleeve. Alchemic smithing had rapidly evolved over the years, entirely bypassing the old, tedious methods of traditional forging. Today, a highly skilled caster could literally bend the rules of reality itself to their whim. But this specific testing environment was a blatant trap designed solely to guarantee Hans's flawless victory. With a tight time limit and an abundance of highly specific rules, traditional smithing was severely intentionally handicapped. Hans, however, was a pampered prodigy who could flawlessly synthesize any ore in just 30 minutes flat. His resonance speed was absolutely terrifying, operating on a level that left even seasoned seniors eating his dust. The entire test was a carefully constructed sham, heavily favoring the Barmuth heir's highly specific and unique talents. It was a cunning, underhanded play by the fox, Michael Barmuth, ensuring his son's absolute, undeniable dominance. But just as the judges settled back into their seats to watch the inevitable, a sudden movement caught their eyes. The protagonist boldly stepped forward, his bare hands filled with radically different, highly dangerous stones. He held a jagged piece of hydrogite and a blazing, pulsing fire-red stone. The judges audibly gasped in sheer, unadulterated disbelief at his incredibly reckless selection. These were the volatile, extremely dangerous fire attribute counterparts to Hans's safe choices, known for their explosive nature. The vice dean narrowed his cold eyes, silently mocking the foolish, suicidal pride of the commoner boy. He naturally assumed the kid was deliberately picking contrasting ores just to show off and act tough. In a spectacular display of supreme arrogance, Hans openly mocked his opponent's meager, pathetic mana pool. He coldly declared that a low-level weakling could never even hope to control the furious burning energy of a fire-red stone. Hans smugly began his own synthesis process, absolutely confident that this victory would be completely effortless. But the protagonist just smiled a dark, knowing smile, completely and utterly unbothered by the childish insults. A glowing holographic system interface suddenly flickered to brilliant life right before his eyes. His hidden, overpowered skill, bond engraving, was forcefully and successfully activated. The system instantly granted him the terrifying ability to fuse volatile bond stones directly onto his own physical body. Without a single moment's hesitation, he forcefully equipped the burning fire-joined iron straight onto his right arm. Searing, intense flames violently erupted from his skin, illuminating the dark exam room with a blinding golden glow. Hans glared sideways through the light, quickly dismissing the fiery display as nothing more than a cheap, pointless trick. The vice dean openly scoffed at the reckless strategy, calling it the absolute height of suicidal foolishness. In standard alchemic theory, dangerous attribute ores were only supposed to softly resonate with calm, pure mana. Forcing unstable, raging elemental mana together like this was a guaranteed, undeniable recipe for a catastrophic magical explosion. They all held their breath, just waiting for the inevitable bloody blast that would tear the arrogant commoner apart. The terrifying flames roared even higher, spinning rapidly into a chaotic, suffocating vortex of uncontrollable heat. But instead of a gory explosion, a blinding flash of highly concentrated, perfectly controlled energy enveloped the room. The intense, overwhelming firepower radiating from the boy was completely unlike anything the veteran judges had ever witnessed. From the dead center of the swirling inferno, the absolutely perfect form of a completed, flawless weapon began to materialize. The system cheerfully chimed, confirming the shockingly successful creation of a rare-grade, fire-stacked sheath. The vice dean violently jolted out of his comfortable seat, his jaw dropping in absolute, utterly terrified shock. It was completely impossible. The sheer crafting speed and flawless mana stability defied every single known law of magic. Completely overwhelmed by the sudden suffocating heat radiating from the protagonist, Hans lost all control of his own mana, watching in horror as his precious waterstones violently shattered into a million useless pieces. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the academy, but inside the smithing department's exam hall, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Debris littered the testing grounds, the silent aftermath of a brutal and unexpected demonstration. Looking over the destruction, one of the evaluators sighed, admitting that normally a performance like this would guarantee a recommendation for the faculty top candidate. Sehun stood completely unfazed by the praise, his expression unreadable as the judges debated his fate. But the senior examiner leaned back, clearly dissatisfied, declaring the entire situation incredibly unfortunate. Clenching his fist, the blonde professor gritted his teeth, furious that the highly anticipated clash ended in a forfeit without a single blow being traded. Pointing out the severe injuries a student had just sustained, he argued that moving forward was absolutely impossible. He firmly pushed to void the test completely and announce a retake at a later date, desperately trying to erase Sehun's achievement from the records. The senior examiner immediately fired back, refusing to scrap an exam that had already concluded just because of one student's fatal carelessness. With a manipulative smirk, the blonde professor twisted the words, questioning if his colleague really valued a mere test result over a student's well-being. Stepping forward to assert his dominance, he decided to completely dismantle Sehun's credibility right then and there. He raised his voice, reminding everyone that the absolute fastest mana resonance time ever recorded in academic history was a grueling 5 minutes. Pointing an accusatory finger, he demanded to know how a mere freshman could possibly achieve perfect resonance the exact second he activated his mana. Unshaken by the harsh accusations, Sehun calmly began to dismantle the professor's outdated logic. He explained that true alchemic smithing was never about brute force, but rather a lost technique designed to forge weapons using pure mana when normal methods failed. The glowing red blade hovered in the air, a perfect testament to a forgotten era of flawless craftsmanship. The true pursuit of alchemic smithing wasn't about killing the ore and forcing the blacksmith's will into it, but gently tracing the roots of the core and coaxing out its natural life force. Sehun locked eyes with his accusers, stating matter-of-factly that this profound truth was exactly what he had just demonstrated. He shrugged, casually adding that this revolutionary method was actually so simple it would become standard practice in a few years anyway. Cornered by undeniable logic, the blonde professor's smirk returned as he stubbornly twisted the explanation, accusing Sehun of using underhanded tricks to achieve the impossible. He scoffed at the masterpiece resting on the table, refusing to believe a nobody with zero family backing could forge a rare-grade weapon legitimately. Disgust flashed across Sehun's face, completely baffled by the sheer ignorance standing before him. The sheer audacity of the accusation left him utterly speechless, realizing there was no reasoning with someone this arrogant. Believing he had won, the blonde professor smugly ordered Sehun to be disqualified for cheating and demanded an immediate retest. The senior examiner hesitated, slowly nodding along as the overwhelming pressure of the situation began to sway his judgment. But before the final verdict could be passed, a sharp voice cut through the room as the red-haired faculty head marched forward. She gently picked up the controversial weapon, her hands trembling as she felt the sheer density of the mana radiating from the sheath. Her eyes widened in absolute disbelief, mesmerized by the flawless internal structure that defied all modern logic. Spinning around, she pointed directly at Sehun, her professional composure completely shattering in an instant. Drooling with manic obsession, she desperately begged to take just one bite, or at least one single lick, of the magnificent blade. The blonde professor froze, his smug expression melting into utter bewilderment at his superior's deeply unhinged reaction. A deafening silence washed over the room, carrying the sheer awkwardness of the moment like a chilling breeze. The absolute absurdity of the request left everyone completely paralyzed, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Later that evening, the vibrant colors of the sunset bathed the bustling downtown streets in a warm, peaceful glow. Sehun walked home quietly, finally free from the exhausting and petty politics of the academy. Analyzing his creation in hindsight, he admitted that while the overall completion level was acceptable, it still wasn't his best work. The fine-tuning was still a bit rough around the edges, a small imperfection that deeply gnawed at his perfectionist instincts. Still, a highly satisfied chuckle escaped his lips as he remembered Vice Dean Barmuth shaking with uncontrollable rage. But mid-step he suddenly froze, the name Barmuth echoing in his mind like a dark, forgotten curse. Clutching his head, memories of his past life violently flooded back, remembering the ruthless bastard who bought his weapons for dirt cheap, only for them to suddenly explode on the battlefield. He remembered the agonizing pain of the mana backlash, the devastating injuries that ruined lives all because of one man's endless greed. His eyes darkened with cold realization, connecting the tragic dots between his past and the arrogant professor from today. His footsteps halted completely as the crushing weight of the revelation settled into his bones. The notorious blacksmith who had permanently crippled the legendary rabid dog Luis Valent with a lifelong after-effect was none other than Barmuth. Disbelief turned into a sharp, predatory glare as he realized the man he despised the most was right in front of him all along. In this second life, his primary goal was to find the monstrous three hounds early and straighten them out before they destroyed the world. A sinister, calculating smile crept across his face, realizing he had just solved his biggest future problem without even trying. If he simply kept Barmuth from running wild and producing defective weapons, Luis would never suffer the trauma that sent her off the rails in the first place. Back at the academy, the heavy doors of the Borsippa faculty meeting room slammed open as a fierce emergency debate erupted. The red-haired faculty head sat at the center of the storm, completely surrounded by outrage over her highly controversial decision. Barmuth aggressively challenged her authority, demanding to know if she was seriously going to make a reckless freshman the faculty top candidate. The other professors squirmed in their seats, desperately trying to soften the blow by framing their heavy outrage as mere friendly advice. She sat in absolute silence, her piercing gaze daring any of them to openly defy her unmatched expertise. A senior professor nervously raised his hands in surrender, gently reminding her that she had only recently taken the position and needed to tread carefully. Adjusting his glasses, another board member admitted the weapon was impressive, but insisted they needed more time to review the situation before making such a radical leap. Rising to her feet, she immediately silenced the entire room, revealing that they were only hesitating because they hadn't truly understood the terrifying brilliance of Si-hoon's fire-stacked sheath. Slamming her hands down on the long table, she laid her entire career on the line, declaring that if they still couldn't accept her absolute judgment, she would immediately step down from her position. 54 years ago, humanity faced a sudden and terrifying turning point when the heavens sent down the massive hero tower, promising a new era of human evolution. But the world quickly learned that this sudden blessing came with a devastating curse, as the depths unleashed the Demon Legion Swamp, a vile force that corrupted all life it touched. To fight back against this colossal calamity and secure a future, humanity built a massive sanctuary right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This was Babel, the largest and most prestigious academy in history, a place where legends were forged and the weak were weeded out. Standing at the absolute pinnacle of this institution was the ascended emperor, Ludwig Schubert, a man who carried the heavy weight of the world on his shoulders. Under his strict guidance, countless heroes had been trained, polished, and sent forth to conquer the tower and protect humanity's fragile existence. Now, a brand new generation of eager cadets stood before him in the grand stadium, listening intently to his booming voice. He declared that they too would become the world's shield, reminding every single student of the immense life-threatening duty they now bore. Observing the legendary emperor from the middle of the crowd, a certain young man couldn't help but analyze the revered figure. He knew that despite the principal's gentle smile and grandfatherly aura, the man was far more ruthless and calculating in reality. The solemn, heavy atmosphere of the entrance ceremony quickly shifted into pure excitement as the energetic announcer suddenly took over the stage. It was finally time for the main event, the highly anticipated combat demonstrations from this year's top incoming students. Hearing that the top cadets from each respective faculty were being called up to the stage, the young man just let out an exhausted, heavy sigh. As the top student of his own faculty, he knew he was about to be dragged straight into the spotlight, whether he wanted the attention or not. The crowd completely erupted as the announcer officially kicked off the demonstrations, the hype in the massive stadium reaching an absolute boiling point. To test the new students, the Academy rolled out a newly manufactured automaton model number 9 golem straight from the marionette factory. This wasn't some cheap, fragile training dummy, it was a hulking mechanical beast boasting the combat power of a certified C-rank hero. Without any ranged weaponry or special armaments equipped, it was crystal clear this golem was built to ruthlessly test the students in raw close-quarters combat. The announcer's voice boomed through the stadium speakers, hyping up the crowd as he called up the very first challenger. Stepping up to the plate was the pride of the combat faculty, their top prodigy, the fiercely confident Jake Myers. Jake cracked his knuckles and walked onto the massive arena, completely unfazed by the towering heavy machine waiting to crush him. The young man watched closely from the sidelines, his mind instantly flashing back to the memories of his previous life. He remembered Jake as a powerful A-rank hero, but one who tragically died in his mid-20s before reaching his true peak. The announcer screamed into the microphone to officially start the match, and in the blink of an eye, the entire atmosphere shifted. Before the mechanical golem could even register the starting signal, Jake exploded off the ground with terrifying explosive speed. He instantly closed the distance, launching a ruthless, lightning-fast barrage of strikes that left the audience completely speechless. The raw, unadulterated talent he was displaying right now was the kind of absolute genius Babel only saw once every 10 years. The heavy machine tried to brace itself and retaliate, but Jake's fists were a blur of pure destructive force, giving it zero room to breathe. Seeing this overwhelming display, the young man couldn't fathom how someone with this much explosive potential had peaked at a mere A rank in his past life. Jake effortlessly weaved under a massive sweeping counterattack, his eyes locked onto the automaton's armored core with deadly precision. With a wicked, adrenaline-fueled grin, he pulled his arm back, gathering every single ounce of his kinetic energy into one hyper-focused point. He unleashed a devastating bone-shattering hook that slammed right into the golem's chest, sending a massive shockwave ripping through the air. The sheer impact physically lifted the heavy machine off its feet, its internal systems violently short-circuiting under the extreme pressure. Sparks flew wildly as the automaton was violently thrown backward, skidding helplessly across the pristine arena floor like a broken toy. But Jake didn't stop there. He followed up relentlessly, determined to completely end the fight before the machine could even attempt a recovery protocol. He planted his feet firmly and delivered a final earth-shattering blow that completely caved in the golem's thick reinforced defenses. The heavy metal shrieked and buckled as the automaton was blasted across the stage, completely out of commission and utterly defeated. Breathing heavily but looking entirely satisfied with his warm-up, Jake casually brushed the dust off his uniform with a victorious smirk. The entire stadium was dead silent for a split second before erupting into absolute deafening madness. The announcer completely lost his mind, screaming into the mic as he praised Jake for utterly overwhelming a C-rank threat in mere seconds. It was a flawless, dominating performance that proved exactly why he was feared and respected as the top student of the combat faculty. But while the crowd was busy cheering their lungs out, the young man waiting for his turn felt a massive drop of cold sweat roll down his face. Jake had shaken the entire stage way too hard right from the start, setting an impossibly high, almost unfair bar for the rest of them. Whoever had to follow up that god-tier act was going to feel a soul-crushing amount of pressure from the expectant crowd. Luckily for him, he was spared for a moment, as the announcer eagerly called for the top student of the support faculty to step up to the plate. A beautiful, dark-haired girl stepped forward, her calm, elegant, and icy demeanor completely contrasting the burning hype in the room. This was Erika Inoue, the eldest daughter of one of Japan's 3 great houses, and a true, undisputed prodigy. But looking at her, the young man's thoughts immediately drifted to the dark, horrifyingly tragic fate that awaited her in the future. In his past life, she had wielded a legendary myth-grade weapon and made a massive name for herself as an unstoppable S-rank hero. But eventually, the demonic power she wielded consumed her mind, turning her into a literal monster that had to be brutally put down by her own family. Knowing she was a walking, ticking time bomb of demonic corruption, he firmly decided it was best to completely avoid her at all costs. But just as she elegantly walked past him toward the stage, she suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Without turning her head, her piercing, glowing eyes shifted sideways, locking directly onto him with an intense, suffocating pressure. A sharp chill ran straight down his spine, leaving him utterly confused and slightly terrified as to why she was suddenly paying attention to him. Brushing off the creepy, unsettling encounter, he forced his attention back to the arena as a brand new automaton was heavily deployed. To make things fair and challenging, this specific model number 9 was equipped with extra heavy armor, multiplying its defensive power by 1.5 times. The crowd leaned in, incredibly curious and slightly skeptical to see how a fragile support faculty student would handle such a tanky, immovable opponent. Instead of taking a martial arts stance or drawing a blade, Erika calmly raised an ornate, glowing Gothic birdcage into the air. The heavy steel doors of the arena locked shut, with a loud clang as the reinforced golem locked its sensors onto its new target. With a chillingly cold and absolute command, Erika unlocked the cage, unleashing the dark, swirling entity resting inside. A massive, terrifying raven made of pure, suffocating shadow burst forth, its glowing blue eyes radiating pure, unadulterated malice. The beast let out a deafening, metallic shriek that sent a visceral wave of raw fear and dread through the entire packed stadium. Without waiting for a verbal command, the monstrous bird spread its shadowy wings and dive-bombed the heavily armored golem at breakneck speed. The automaton frantically raised its heavy arms to defend itself, but its mechanical logic was completely useless against the incoming supernatural shadow. A massive, blinding pillar of dark, destructive energy erupted the exact moment the raven made contact with the machine. The devastating, concentrated attack pierced straight through the reinforced heavy-duty armor as if it were made of wet, fragile paper. Chunks of metal and debris rained down on the arena floor as the massive explosion of dark, demonic energy slowly began to clear. The crowd collectively gasped in horror and awe as they saw the automaton standing completely still, a massive, gaping hole blown clean through its heavy chest plate. With just a single, effortless strike from her summon, she had completely obliterated an opponent with high-level C-rank defensive capabilities. The stadium exploded into cheers once again, completely mesmerized and slightly terrified by her overwhelming, monstrous display of power. Watching the crowd go absolutely wild for Erika's flawless victory, the young man just buried his face in his hand, cursing his terrible, rotten luck. If he just walked up there and showed off his technical weapon normally, he was definitely going to get relentlessly booed out of the building. With his pride entirely on the line and the crowd's expectations at an all-time impossible high, he reluctantly gripped his weapon and stepped forward as the announcer finally called his name. The anticipation in the arena reached its peak as the announcer finally called for the technical faculty's top student, Lee Se-hoon. Sitting high above the crowds, Supervisor Ludwig Schubert watched with quiet expectation. The faculty heads murmured among themselves, acknowledging that this year's freshmen were built entirely different. Even faculty head Ryu Eunha couldn't hide her excitement, hoping the young prodigy wouldn't crumble under the immense pressure. The crowd was practically buzzing, completely captivated by the unbelievable demonstrations that had already taken place. They desperately wanted to know if this new cadet could truly surpass the spectacular displays of his peers. But as Se-hoon unsheathed his creation, a wave of confusion washed over the spectators. A rare-grade weapon from a freshman was undeniably impressive, yet the blade itself looked completely uninspired. Whispers echoed through the stands as students complained that it severely lacked the flashy impact of the previous demonstration. Watching from the sidelines, a rival instructor smirked, convinced that the coveted faculty head seat was already his for the taking. Oblivious to the murmurs, the announcer proceeded, declaring they would test the weapon on a standard D-rank combat model. But before the words could fully leave his mouth, Sehun bluntly interrupted. He firmly rejected the standard target, demanding they bring out model number 8 instead. The announcer froze, completely caught off guard by the sheer audacity of the request. It was common knowledge that model number 8 was built specifically to withstand brutal attacks from B-rank heroes. And as if that wasn't absurd enough, Sehun calmly added that the automaton needed to be fully equipped with heavy armor. The announcer broke into a cold sweat, accusing the young cadet of trying to sabotage the entire event. But despite the protests, heavy footsteps soon echoed through the arena as the massive armored automaton was deployed. Ludwig watched the imposing figure stomp onto the grounds, thoroughly amused by the escalating situation. With a knowing grin, the veteran supervisor silently urged the boy to go and raise some absolute hell. The tension snapped as the announcer hesitantly gave the signal for the demonstration to begin. Every eye in the auditorium locked onto the lone student facing down a mechanical juggernaut. Ryu Eunha leaned forward in her seat, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed his combat stance. Sehun simply gripped his hilt, his expression completely unfazed by the towering threat before him. With a quiet breath, he promised to deliver a performance that would shatter all their expectations. He dashed forward, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. Violent, multicolored flames suddenly erupted from his blade, viciously clashing against the air itself. The raw intensity of the fire instantly forced the nearby instructors to shield their eyes. But his rival merely scoffed, dismissing the explosive display as nothing more than a cheap, flashy firework. He mocked the boy's reckless use of mana, fully expecting him to lose control and injure himself. However, Sehun's focus was razor-sharp as he masterfully manipulated the volatile properties of his 5-color flame blade. Knowing the unstable flames would naturally repel each other, he calculated the perfect moment for execution. He seamlessly shifted his technique, activating his Artisan of Flame skill to force the crimson fire deep inside. The specialized fire-stacked sheath greedily absorbed the raging inferno, forcefully locking it within its core. His eyes glowing with intense concentration, Sehun confirmed the agonizingly volatile mana was fully stored. The sheer amount of compressed energy trapped inside the scabbard began to radiate a terrifying, blinding light. Without hesitating for a single second, he fully unleashed the weapon's ultimate skill, Wildfire. The forcibly compressed mana violently ground against itself, completely shattering its unstable container. The rival instructor's smug smile vanished instantly as the blinding flash consumed his vision. A catastrophic explosion of raw, concentrated power erupted outward, obliterating everything in its path. The devastating shockwave violently rocked the entire stadium, sending massive clouds of debris into the sky. As the chaotic dust finally began to settle, absolute silence fell over the horrified spectators. Standing amidst the swirling smoke, Sehun calmly sheathed his weapon, as if nothing had happened. A massive smoking trench was violently carved into the supposedly indestructible arena floor, completely vaporizing the automaton. Sehun let out a long, exhausted breath, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. The announcer's jaw hit the floor, his microphone trembling violently in his hands. Panic instantly set in as he desperately screamed for the construction support team to salvage the ruined auditorium. Shortly after the chaotic demonstration, Sehun found himself standing nervously inside a private office. He awkwardly scratched the back of his neck, apologizing for keeping faculty head Ryu Eunha waiting. He sheepishly admitted that he had been held back to help clean up the absolute mess he made of the arena. Bracing himself for a harsh scolding, he sincerely apologized for completely destroying the central stage. But Eunha quickly waved off his concerns, assuring him that she was the one who needed to apologize. She stepped closer, her serious demeanor suddenly melting away into a desperate, almost obsessive blush. Grabbing him by the shoulders, she frantically offered to pay 10 times the market value for his weapon. Sehun just stood there, completely bewildered by the prestigious faculty head, acting like a crazed fangirl. And as he stared blankly at her, a blue holographic screen quietly chimed, announcing that a new bond had been successfully formed. Ryu Eunha stares in absolute awe, completely mesmerized by the sheer quality of the blazing weapon set. Without warning, a system prompt flashes, confirming that a deep level 1 bond has successfully formed between her and the creator. Sehun watches her reaction, mildly surprised that the connection established itself so quickly. In his past life before the regression, securing this kind of bond only happened after she had consumed several of his finest weapons. Realizing this early connection is a massive advantage, he wastes no time and initiates the bond extraction process. Crackling blue energy surges around his hands as he pulls the essence directly from the newly formed link. The system verifies the extraction, seamlessly pulling the raw data from his target. A glowing crimson sphere materializes in his palm, the high-grade greed iron, a rare metal that perpetually devours iron to generate intense heat. Unha immediately leans in, her eyes wide with desperation, demanding to know if he will sell the weapons to her. Before she can press him further, a sharp knock interrupts them, and faculty head Kim In-cheol announces his presence from the doorway. In-cheol steps into the room, his expression strict, stating that the headmaster wishes to begin the award ceremony immediately. He turns his attention to Sehun, specifically requesting to take the cadet with him. Sehun nods calmly, brushing past a disappointed Unha and promising to see her later. She watches him leave, her stomach growling quietly in the sudden silence of the empty office. The journey takes them deep into the sprawling grounds of the prestigious Babel Academy. They approach the old main building, the legendary Marduk Manor, a structure practically humming with ancient power. The late afternoon sun filters through the massive stained glass windows, casting long shadows across the grand hallway. In-cheol leads the way down the opulent corridor, the silence between them thick with anticipation. He glances back, firmly warning Sehun to mind his absolute best manners in front of the headmaster. He reminds the boy that the headmaster was generous enough to overlook the complete destruction of the auditorium during his earlier demonstration. Stopping before a massive set of doors, In-cheol emphasizes that the man inside exists on an entirely different level from anyone else. Sehun just smirks, unbothered by the warning, telling his senior not to worry. The heavy double doors swing open with a resounding thud, revealing the cavernous office inside. At the far end of the room, seated behind a massive desk, a commanding silhouette waits in the shadows. It is the ascended emperor, Headmaster Ludwig, a man whose very presence suffocates the room. Sehun recognizes him instantly. This is the hero who, before the regression, took down the 6th demon god alone in a brutal mutual kill. The immense pressure of Ludwig's aura flares up, testing the limits of the young cadet standing before him. Sehun doesn't flinch, maintaining his icy composure, internally acknowledging the overwhelming strength of a true full clearer. Ludwig breaks the silence, praising every weapon Sehun showcased during the demonstration as truly fascinating. He admits with a dry smile that while there were still things lacking, it makes him eagerly look forward to the boy's future. Sehun remains stoic, knowing perfectly well that tossing his true masterpieces into that demonstration would have been a massive waste. Because of his talent, Ludwig declares he will grant the cadet 2 exclusive rewards of his choosing. Sehun steps forward, slightly surprised by the generosity of the offer. He quickly calculates his current limits, knowing exactly what his regressed body requires. Without hesitation, he requests rewards that will permanently raise his mana capacity and his memory retention. Ludwig raises a hand, and a brilliant golden light begins to materialize from thin air. The blinding energy drips down, solidifying into a tangible physical form. With a heavy crash, an ornate golden shield-like crest impacts the floor, radiating intense power. The sheer force of the artifact shakes the room. The system identifies it as ink-heavy darkness, a heroic-grade shard that devours everything except darkness itself. Next, the Dream Ivory appears, a mid-grade heroic artifact capable of crossing the dangerous boundary between reality and dreams. Sehun holds the priceless artifacts, his mind already racing with the endless possibilities they bring. He knows these materials are notoriously difficult to handle, but his past life's experience already shows him exactly how to forge them. Ludwig watches the boy's calculating gaze, asking if the rewards are to his liking. Sehun smiles sharply, declaring them absolutely perfect. After Sehun departs, In-cheol voices his concern, questioning the wisdom of handing such dangerous rewards to a mere student. Ludwig calmly takes a drag from his pipe, stating that the boy simply has the sheer capacity to digest them. He notes that looking into Sehun's eyes felt less like looking at a teenager and more like facing a weary old man trapped in a kid's body. The headmaster's gaze darkens as he realizes the boy possesses a terrifying depth of experience that even he cannot fully gauge. Meanwhile, Sehun strides out of the manor, completely unfazed, his mind already locked onto his next objective. Back at the academy's main instructional building, the students gather for their afternoon sessions. A student named Hans nervously asks a blonde noble where he wants to eat lunch. The noble rudely brushes him off, loudly bragging about his exclusive plans with Senior Howard today. Hans is visibly shocked, amazed that his classmate is meeting with Borsippa's third-year top faculty member. The noble puffs out his chest, boasting that their elite families are acquainted, granting him special privileges. Hans nervously stammers, asking if he could possibly tag along to get some advice too. Suddenly, the heavy classroom door creaks open, cutting the conversation short. Sehun steps into the room, his expression dark, his golden eyes glowing with a quiet, dangerous intensity. The atmosphere in the room instantly drops as his chilling gaze sweeps across the terrified students. The arrogant noble flinches hard, completely unnerved by the sheer weight of Sehun's killing intent. Sehun silently walks past them, taking his seat without uttering a single word. The noble clenches his trembling fists, cursing under his breath, furious at being intimidated by a rootless nobody. The door swings open again, and Kim In-cheol enters, sternly ordering everyone to sit down. Standing at the podium, he announces that since it's their first class, they will begin with practical introductions. He slams a heavy box onto the desk, revealing rough, dark stones known as projection alloy. He explains that this specific ore is dozens of times more sensitive to mana than any normal metal in existence. Picking up a raw piece, he demonstrates slowly injecting his own volatile mana into the stone. The ore instantly reacts, bursting into a fierce, roaring flame. It rapidly stretches and solidifies, taking the shape of a massive, imposing black greatsword. Sehun watches intently, acknowledging In-cheol's flawless mana control and understanding exactly why he's on the list of the world's top artisans. In-cheol explains that because the alloy is so absurdly sensitive, it's completely useless as an actual combat weapon. However, it perfectly reflects the creator's hidden traits, acting as a mirror that forces you to look back at your true self. Because of this unique property, weapons forged from this alloy are famously called doppelgangers. Their assignment is simple. They must introduce themselves to the faculty by crafting their own doppelganger. He adds a layer of pressure, noting that the finished pieces will be displayed in the main building for an entire week. The blonde noble eagerly steps up first, channeling his mana into the stone with a desperate need to show off. He produces a flashy, ornate golden rapier, drawing gasps of awe from the rest of the class. Sehun observes the display calmly, completely unimpressed, noting that there isn't a single person here with actual crucial talent. Finally, In-cheol calls the last name on the roster, Lee Sehun. Sehun grips the raw piece of projection alloy, a confident smirk crossing his face as he decides there is absolutely no reason to hold back. A blinding crimson light erupts from the stone in his hand as his overwhelming regressed mana violently pours into the sensitive ore. His golden eyes narrow with intense focus, pushing the physical limits of the alloy far beyond what it was ever meant to handle. The sheer magnitude of his creation shatters the boundaries of a simple sword, projecting a blinding angelic structure of pure energy that violently bursts through the roof, towering over the entire academy. The academy halls buzzed with an unusual energy as a massive crowd gathered, eager to witness a supposed miracle. Everyone's attention was completely captivated by a single, imposing weapon standing proudly on display. Whispers echoed through the corridors, with jealous upperclassmen scoffing at the ridiculous hype surrounding a mere freshman. They simply couldn't believe that a new student was already being treated like a seasoned master by the faculty. The official academy report claimed a bizarre anomaly had occurred during the forging process, causing the blade to violently absorb all nearby materials. But rather than punishing the boy for the reckless mistake, the instructors deemed it a terrifying display of raw aptitude, choosing to exhibit the monstrous blade exactly as it was. Skeptics in the crowd quickly dismissed the masterpiece as a lucky fluke, an accidental result born entirely from wasting too much raw alloy. However, not everyone was blinded by jealousy. A sharp-eyed top student stepped forward, completely rejecting the ignorant rumors. Her companion nodded silently, sensing the exact same hidden truth hidden within the metal. They realized that no ordinary stroke of luck could produce a blade capable of capturing the true, terrifying essence of a once-in-a-generation prodigy. Meanwhile, deep inside the sweltering heat of the smithing workshop, the prodigy in question was completely lost in his own chaotic world. Sparks rained down like a relentless meteor shower as his heavy hammer struck the searing metal with blinding speed. Every single swing was a masterclass in lethal precision, creating an agonizingly perfect rhythm that defied human limits. Watching nervously from the sidelines, the senior teaching assistant checked his stopwatch, his eyes widening in absolute horror. He realized the freshman's inhuman timing hadn't wavered by even a fraction of a millisecond over the entire grueling session. Overwhelmed by the sheer insurmountable gap in skill, the instructor muttered that there was absolutely nothing left for them to teach a monster like this. Defeated and entirely out of their depth, the faculty decided it was safest to just leave him entirely to his own devices. Finally, the relentless hammering ceased, leaving the exhausted young smith to catch his breath in the stifling smoke-filled air. He wiped the heavy sweat from his brow, his frail body screaming in agonizing protest after pushing itself past the absolute brink. Yet, as he stared down at the flawlessly gleaming blades he had just forged, deep dissatisfaction clouded his eyes. A dangerous manic glint flared in his gaze, a perfectionist's endless hunger that utterly refused to settle for mediocrity. Without a second of hesitation, he gripped his massive hammer once more, fully intending to obliterate his own flawless work. Just as the crushing blow was about to shatter the blade to pieces, a panicked voice desperately screamed out to stop him. The teaching assistant rushed over, a frantic mix of terror and awe painted across his face. He practically begged the boy not to destroy the weapons, desperately reminding him that the academy urgently needed to sell them just to secure their struggling budget. Exasperated by the prodigy's impossible, maddening standards, the assistant asked what could possibly be wrong with such a legendary creation. A wry, self-deprecating smile crossed the boy's face as he admitted the weapon was fine. The fatal flaw was his own pathetic physical limitations. He coldly explained that to forge the true, nightmarish gear he actually needed, his current stamina was far too fragile to survive the refinement process. Hearing this, the assistant nonchalantly suggested that if physical endurance was the only bottleneck, he should just rely on artificial magic buffs instead of grueling bodily training. The sheer brilliant simplicity of the solution struck the ancient regressor like a violent bolt of lightning. In his past life of endless war, he had been so stubbornly obsessed with pure, raw strength that he completely ignored the convenient shortcuts of magic. But now, trapped inside a frail, unconditioned vessel, his arrogant pride was entirely useless. He quickly realized that as long as he maintained a powerful physical enhancement spell, he could easily withstand the backlash of forging forbidden dark metals. Grateful for the sudden, game-changing revelation, he respectfully bowed his head, thanking the stunned senior for pointing out the obvious. Emboldened by the boy's respect, the assistant offered one last piece of crucial advice, warning him to stop bleeding out so much mana and to compress his energy into a singular devastating point. The young smith instantly absorbed the terrifying tip, knowing it would drastically multiply his forging efficiency in his current weakened state. The instructor smiled warmly, deeply relieved he could finally offer some actual guidance to the intimidating freshman. With a clear path to absolute power now set before him, the boy packed up his gear, ready to hunt down the exact magic he lacked. The sprawling academy operated under a cutthroat system that ruthlessly encouraged students to hunt for their own specialized knowledge. Knowing exactly where to find his prize, he made his way to the campus transit station, fully prepared to cross into rival territory. Despite the freedom to explore, the academy's laws were merciless. Failing his primary classes would result in immediate, unforgiving expulsion. But the terrifying risks meant nothing to him as the sleek Magi train violently screeched to a halt at the platform. An automated voice cheerfully announced his arrival at the highly prestigious, fiercely guarded Department of Ritual Arts. As he stepped off the train, the atmosphere completely shifted, the air thick with suffocating tension and elite noble snobbery. He barely made it a few steps before his path was entirely blocked by a pathetic group of arrogant upperclassmen surrounding a striking noble girl. Utterly unfazed by their intimidating posturing, he coldly ordered the upperclassmen to get out of his way. The sheer disrespect instantly triggered the seniors, their violent mana flaring up in blind anger at the audacious freshman. But he merely stared back with dead, emotionless eyes radiating a silent, suffocating bloodlust of his own. Without even raising his voice, he repeated his absolute command, the subtle, deadly threat in his tone cutting through the air like a guillotine. The crushing weight of his aura forced the aggressive seniors to subconsciously step aside, their arrogant confidence instantly shattering into fear. Intrigued by the utterly fearless display, the dark-haired noble girl finally turned her calculating gaze toward the strange anomaly. Completely ignoring her stunned, trembling lackeys, she fell into step right beside the mysterious boy. Taking total control of the situation, she smoothly offered to act as his personal guide through her exclusive department. Her desperate followers panicked, frantically trying to remind her of their highly scheduled elite faculty meeting. But she didn't even spare them a glance, coldly and ruthlessly dismissing their pathetic whining as she walked away. Leaving the utterly crushed seniors crying in their wake, the two forged ahead into the sprawling mystical campus. Breaking the tense silence, she curiously asked what kind of obscure magic a heavy-handed smith could possibly be hunting for. He didn't waste a single breath on pleasantries, bluntly stating his absolute need to master physical enhancement buffs. He demanded a highly specific type of magic, one that would violently skyrocket his bodily limits without ever interfering with the delicate microscopic flow of his forging. Deeply puzzled by his bizarre, contradictory request, she questioned why he was suddenly interested in barrier arts, a discipline entirely focused on static, immovable defense. Instead of arguing, she decided to visually demonstrate her point, smoothly pulling an elegant wax-sealed envelope from her coat. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she channeled her unique mana, instantly activating a complex, violently glowing spell circle. Ethereal chains violently wrapped around the fragile paper, infusing it with overlapping layers of invisible, indestructible magical protection. Handing the highly enchanted item over, she confidently challenged the arrogant smith to try and tear the simple paper in half. He applied lethal pressure, instantly noticing that the advanced spell hadn't just made the paper stiff and uselessly rigid. It was an absolutely brilliant fluid technique. The material remained completely flexible, only violently hardening the exact microsecond a destructive force was applied. His eyes instantly lit up with predatory excitement, realizing this was the exact adaptive bodily control he needed for his insanely precise forging. As he deeply analyzed the intricate glowing spellcraft, a chilling sense of familiarity washed over him, easily recognizing the ancient primitive roots of the magic. But right before the smug noble could finish bragging about the absolute, legendary invincibility of her family's signature technique, a sickening, violent rip echoed through the quiet air, and her arrogant, confident smile instantly vanished into pure, unadulterated horror. Her brilliant mind completely short-circuited as she realized this unknown monster had effortlessly decoded and completely shattered her inescapable ultimate barrier. Casually tossing the perfectly shredded pieces back to her, he offered a half-hearted compliment, thanking her for the completely free lesson. Having violently stolen exactly what he came for, he turned his back on the stunned genius, callously telling her to go play with her desperate, tailing fanboys. Her panic-stricken lackeys finally caught up, frantically shouting in terror to see if their precious, untouchable lady was harmed. But she didn't hear a single word they said, her wide, trembling eyes glued entirely to the utterly destroyed envelope lying pitifully on the cobblestones. Picking up the ruined, impossible evidence, a dangerous, obsessive thrill violently sparked in her eyes. She had just found her absolute newest obsession. Whispers fill the air as Sehun arrives at the testing grounds. The other students can't help but stare, murmuring about why someone from another faculty is even here. Rumors are already swirling that he was seen walking side by side with the academy's top student yesterday. Some dismiss the gossip, claiming they just happened to be at the same exhibition by coincidence. But the heavy, judgmental stares make it clear that no one actually believes it's just a misunderstanding. Sehun completely ignores the chatter, internally sighing at the unwanted and annoying attention. He reflects on the ridiculous rumors, noting that if the prodigy actually liked him, a magical bond would have formed by now. Looking around the dense, ominous forest, he wonders what kind of screening process this class actually requires. He had just signed up for a basic course, only to be dragged out into the woods for a mandatory entrance test. Glancing at the towering trees, he dryly wonders if this is going to be some tedious, drawn-out treasure hunt. Or worse, if the instructors hid something deep in the woods using complex magical barriers just to waste his time. Meanwhile, the instructors are watching the group closely from the shadows, evaluating their every move. A voice suddenly rings out through the trees, announcing that they've already passed the initial phase of the exam. In a distant observation room, Professor Robert Perry rubs his temples, reviewing the student files with a massive headache. He realizes that the young lady, a top-tier prodigy, took an active interest in a seemingly average student. An assistant hands him a tablet confirming the highly unusual dynamic between the two of them. It suddenly makes sense why an undisputed genius would sign up for a basic introductory lecture. Because of her sudden enrollment, the class size has tripled overnight with students trying to ride her coattails. But instead of being happy about the popularity, the professor is incredibly stressed by the pressure to maintain standards. To thin the herd, he decides to severely escalate the difficulty of the entrance exam without warning. He casually announces the addition of the notorious Soul Dazzle Labyrinth to this year's trials. It's an insidious barrier specifically designed to completely warp a person's senses and perception of reality. Once trapped inside, a normal student would lose their way almost instantly, wandering in circles until they collapse. It's considered a fundamental ritual art but absolutely deadly to anyone uninitiated in barrier magic. If you don't understand the flow of mana, you won't even realize you've been caught in its trap. Back in the forest, the professor watches Sehun's progress with wide, utterly disbelieving eyes. He had fully expected the prodigy to carry Sehun through the trap, guiding him step by step. But she hadn't lifted a single finger or offered a single word of advice to help him. Instead, Sehun had shattered the complex illusion purely on raw, terrifying instinct. Regaining his composure, the professor steps out from the shadows to address the surviving students. He commends them for passing the first obstacle, but his sharp gaze completely lingers on Sehun. The group is then split into separate classes for the second, much more grueling phase of the exam. A cocky, red-haired student steps forward, eager to show off his abilities to the rest of the group. He sees this as the absolute perfect opportunity to impress the top-tier girl watching silently from the sidelines. The professor points to the ground, officially revealing the mechanics of the next challenge. It's a glowing, intricate web woven purely from highly condensed defensive mana. The rules are simple but strict. Maintain the barrier's outer integrity while breaking it from the inside out. The ultimate catch is that they can only use their own raw mana to systematically dismantle it. The professor warns them that they will be graded mercilessly on their speed and precise execution. The red-haired student drops to his knees, immediately slamming his hands into the glowing threads. At the very center of the web sits a core shaped perfectly like a glowing ethereal spider. The moment foreign mana touches the threads, the spider instantly senses the dangerous intrusion. It immediately begins fleeing rapidly along the glowing strands, avoiding any attempt at capture. The real nightmare of the test is that the web constantly regenerates itself as long as the spider survives. The red-haired student grits his teeth, realizing he doesn't have the vast mana capacity for a delicate approach. Enveloping the entire pattern by the book would drain his reserves completely before he even reached the core. Refusing to fail in front of his crush, he decides to completely abandon finesse for raw power. He channels all of his remaining energy into a single desperate brute force attack. A massive surge of lightning crushes the core, violently shattering the web into a million pieces. He pants heavily, sweating bullets, having barely managed to force his way through the barrier. The professor coldly notes his time, 2 minutes and 23 seconds. It's a passing grade, but the professor bluntly tells him he needs to actually understand the structure instead of destroying it. The student slumps back, deeply disappointed that his flashy display was met with sharp criticism. Without skipping a beat, the professor calls the next name on the roster, Erika Inoue. The atmosphere instantly shifts as the faculty's undisputed top student steps up to the glowing web. Without a hint of hesitation or wasted movement, she casually raises her hand toward the magic circle. In a blinding blur of motion, her mana ruthlessly slices through the intricate glowing design. She doesn't just break it, she violently and perfectly dismantles the entire ritual pattern in one fell swoop. The web violently shatters, instantly collapsing into harmless particles of light before anyone can blink. The red-haired student watches in absolute jaw-dropping shock at her monstrous, unparalleled speed. She calmly dusts off her hands, completely unfazed by her own terrifying display of power. The professor clicks his stopwatch, recording an insane, near-perfect time of 22 seconds. He notes that while her method was brilliant, a textbook approach would have somehow shaved off another 2 seconds. Erika simply nods, calmly accepting the harsh critique like a seasoned, battle-hardened veteran. Finally, it's Sehun's turn to step up and face the seemingly impossible challenge. The professor squints at him, seeing absolutely nothing special or threatening about the boy at first glance. Sehun crouches in front of the glowing web, his calm eyes locking onto the scuttling core. The other students begin to murmur in confusion as he just sits there, completely motionless. He stares deep into the magical structure, realizing the flow of its energy feels incredibly familiar to him. The regenerative properties of the web are almost fundamentally identical to a high-tier dark magic he used to wield. He deduces that if a structure perfectly restores itself, it requires an exact simultaneous stimulus to break its cycle. The professor watches in baffling silence as Sehun completely refuses to launch a standard attack. Instead of just breaking the web, Sehun sees a rare opportunity to test a completely new, highly dangerous theory. He slowly extends his hand, allowing intense crackling flames to dance across his fingertips. He begins pouring his energy into the web, not to destroy it, but to forcefully hijack its core formula. A massive pillar of violent fire erupts, completely incinerating the spider and the web in a blinding, explosive flash. The professor stares at his stopwatch, which reads a seemingly pathetic 7 minutes and 45 seconds. But a cold sweat drips down the professor's face as he realizes Sehun didn't just pass the test. He completely rewrote the fundamental laws of the ritual, proving he is a monster capable of forging unimaginable power. The moment the Babel administration office sent out the alert, the entire academy was put on notice. Leaning back in his chair, Sehun watched the notifications roll in, fully aware of the storm he was causing. His inbox exploded instantly, professors fighting over the chance to supervise his first intermediate-level smithing project. Yet, amidst the flood of eager applicants, the absolute silence from Weisstein Michael's faction spoke volumes about their shattered pride. But then, a completely unexpected message popped onto his screen, freezing him in his tracks. The faculty head herself was stepping in, bypassing everyone else to personally oversee his work. The doors swung open, revealing her imposing presence, making it clear she wasn't just there to watch, she was there to judge his true worth. Knowing the stakes had just skyrocketed, Sehun steeled his resolve, refusing to back down from the challenge. His material of choice was notorious, ink-heavy darkness, an element so volatile it demanded flawless execution from the very first stage. With practiced precision, he submerged the pitch-black core, initiating the dreaded dark curtain process. Like ink bleeding into crystal water, the impurities began to separate, demanding immense mana control to prevent complete failure. Sehun's gaze sharpened, fully aware that one wrong move would completely shatter the fragile material. Watching in complete silence, the faculty head mentally noted the absolute madness of his technique. As he pulled it from the depths, the darkness had drastically shrunk, its purity now compressed to a terrifying degree. But this was only the beginning, and the second stage required an entirely different kind of mastery. Blazing crimson mana erupted from his core, channeling raw, untamed heat directly into his veins. He carefully stabilized the violent energy, transforming it into the highly regulated guardian wildfire. The flames danced around him, maintaining a perfect, unyielding temperature essential for the brutal physical toll ahead. Gripping his heavy hammer, he coated the iron in the emerald blaze, preparing to strike. With a deafening crack, he brought the hammer down, striking the unstable darkness with everything he had. Even with his immunity to the scorching heat, the agonizing feedback from each strike tore through his muscles, a fact the faculty head observed quietly. He refused to stop, relentlessly pounding away the violent distortions threatening to tear the material apart. Hours bled away, the rhythmic sound of his hammer echoing far beyond the workshop walls. Even a master like her couldn't help but feel the creeping fatigue of simply watching his unending marathon. But as the night dragged on, her boredom shifted back into intense, unwavering focus. 4 agonizing hours into the refinement, his muscles screamed in protest, his grip barely holding on. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the anvil, signaling a massive shift in the material's core. The chaotic distortions finally settled, leaving behind a perfectly stabilized block of pure heavy darkness. Wasting no time, he clamped the glowing mass, ready to move to the final crucial phase. As he poured the liquid shadow into the prepared molds, a wave of shock hit his supervisor. Casting instead of forging was a massive risk, practically guaranteeing the heavy darkness would warp beyond repair. But a sly, confident smirk crept onto Sehun's face as he prepared his hidden trump card. In the microsecond before the material could deform, he forcibly injected a complex mana circuit straight into the cooling darkness. The mold shattered, revealing a flawless, perfectly refined artifact born from absolute madness. The system immediately recognized his reckless genius, rewarding him with a rare, high-tier mastery skill. Breathing a sigh of relief, he inspected his creation, the grueling effort finally paying off. The ink spider bracelet pulsed with power, a mid-quality rare artifact that perfectly synchronized with his mana. But before he could celebrate his triumph, a ridiculously loud growl echoed from his empty stomach. An awkward, heavy silence filled the room as the tension of the last 4 hours instantly vanished. Looking away, completely humiliated, he realized his body had entirely run out of fuel. The faculty head simply stared, trying to process the sudden shift from master blacksmith to starving cadet. Suddenly, a faint resonance pulsed through the air, drawing attention back to the newly forged artifacts. Feeling a bit guilty for keeping her all night, he apologized for not being able to gift her the actual weapon. But he wasn't about to let her leave empty-handed after she stood by and watched his entire process. Igniting her unique soul-melting furnace skill, she prepared to consume whatever he had to offer. He handed over the leftover refined remnants, offering them as a simple palate cleanser for her unique appetite. To her surprise, the pure high-quality darkness dissolved perfectly, delivering an incredibly rich taste. Seeing her genuine satisfaction, he internally cheered, knowing this was a massive boost to their alliance. He watched quietly as she savored the unexpected treat, realizing how easy it was to tailor things to her specific tastes. Standing right in front of him, the intimidating faculty head actually looked completely at ease. Curious about his future plans, she pressed him on what he intended to do with his previous high-tier creations. Casually organizing his tools, he admitted they weren't hitting the market anytime soon. Instead, he was hoarding them for the upcoming subjugation classes, ensuring he had the best gear possible. Touched by his promise to offer her his scraps first, a faint blush crossed her usually stern face. She eagerly accepted the deal, genuinely looking forward to whatever he managed to cook up next. With the deal struck, she gently asked if his brutal forging session had finally come to an end. Leaning back, he let out a huge breath, deeply thankful that the academy staff would handle the messy cleanup. But the moment he tried to stand, his legs completely gave out, his exhausted body shutting down without warning. In a flash of crimson, she was there, catching him effortlessly before he could hit the cold floor. Smiling weakly, he was forced to admit that he had severely miscalculated his own physical limits. Looking down at him, she didn't show an ounce of pity, only a quiet, reassuring confidence. Without hesitation, she scooped him up into a princess carry, preparing to personally deliver him back to his dorm. With a powerful leap, she shattered the stone beneath her, launching them straight through the open window. Airborne and completely at her mercy, he could only marvel at the sheer explosive power she drew from a mere snack. Gliding through the night sky, the cool wind brushed against them, offering a rare moment of peace. Staring at her focused profile, he couldn't help but realize just how wildly his life had shifted since his regression. They soared high above the academy grounds, leaving the intense heat of the workshop far behind them. Meanwhile, completely unaware of his dramatic exit, a lone figure stood waiting patiently in the freezing night. Clutching an important invitation, she stared at the empty path, completely oblivious to the chaos she was about to step into. Rumors explode across the academy's anonymous message boards. The student body is in an absolute frenzy over a top-tier freshman standing outside the smithing building. She's been waiting out there for hours, completely unmoving. Speculation runs wild that she's desperately trying to meet the elusive top student of Borsippa. Inside the classroom, Sehun casually scrolls through the frantic messages. He isn't flattered by the sudden attention at all. In fact, he couldn't care less. If it's really that important, she'll come find me again, he thinks, dismissing the issue entirely. Suddenly, the classroom door aggressively swings open. A burly man wearing a red bandana steps up to the podium, completely killing the chatter. He introduces himself as the new instructor for tools and application. But the syllabus they signed up for has been entirely thrown out the window. Without warning, he orders the entire class to drop their books and head straight to the physical training center. And to make matters worse, the last one to arrive is getting slapped with 20 brutal penalty laps. Panic erupts as the students scramble frantically out of their seats. Sehun sighs heavily, genuinely annoyed that his easy theory class just turned into a physical nightmare. Out on the scorching dirt track, the instructor watches his exhausted students suffer under the sun. He finally reveals the dark, pressing reason behind this sudden curriculum shift. The world is currently being plagued by a string of gruesome, targeted murders. High-ranking blacksmiths are being systematically hunted down one by one. It's the horrifying phenomenon known as the flame blade hunts. Sehun's eyes narrow sharply as he recognizes the cursed name. It was a notoriously brutal case that went completely unsolved in his previous life, leaving a trail of bodies behind. The instructor's warning rings clear. When the enemy breaches the gates, a blacksmith's final line of defense is their own physical body. The students groan in absolute agony as they are forced to keep running. But Sehun silently embraces the brutal workout. He knows better than anyone that his current frail vessel is too weak to survive the wars to come. Every single step he takes feels like dragging his legs through wet concrete, because he's purposefully handicapping himself with a custom-forged item, the Ink Spider Bracelet. Made from refined, heavy darkness, it continuously drains his mana and multiplies his physical weight with every heartbeat. It is absolute, suffocating torture. But the results are undeniable. He pulls up his glowing status window and smirks. Every single one of his stats has spiked significantly from the extreme resistance training. By the end of the year, he vows to forge this weak body into an unstoppable weapon. Suddenly, the instructor barks orders, demanding Sehun step forward. He tosses the exhausted boy a heavy practice sword. It's time to see if the arrogant freshman possesses even an ounce of real combat talent. The heavy gravity bracelet pulls Sihoon's arm down violently. Just holding the basic starting stance takes a monumental effort. But as he steps forward, the air around him completely shifts. He swings. The instructor's eyes widen in sheer unadulterated disbelief. The form isn't just good, it is utterly terrifying. The wooden blade cuts through the air with the ruthless, flawless efficiency of a seasoned killer. The veteran instructor instinctively flinches, feeling a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. For a split second, a battle-hardened veteran actually felt intimidated by a freshman. "Where did you learn that?" the instructor asks, his voice trembling slightly. Sehun smiles innocently, casually lying that he just picked it up by watching hero combat streams online. The instructor completely buys the lie, utterly blind to the dark truth. In his past life, Sehun didn't learn from a screen. He remembered a dark, bloody alleyway shaking down a desperate swordsman. He had brutally beaten the man into submission, forcing him to surrender his secret techniques just to pay off a massive debt. Recognizing a terrifying monster in the making, the instructor makes a swift decision. He writes Sehun a golden ticket, a direct recommendation letter. He sends the boy off to a highly specialized body control class at the prestigious ActionToon facility. Later that afternoon, Sehun arrives at the towering, sunlit institution. But his new elite master isn't exactly what the academy's brochure promised. He is immediately met by a furious, disheveled man screaming desperately at the staff. It's Swordbreaker Ma Kwang-soo, a legendary, retired S-rank hero who used to shake the very foundations of the world. And to Sehun's secret amusement, a notorious pathetic gambling addict he knew all too well from his past life. Kwang-soo aggressively refuses to teach, whining that he has absolutely nothing left to offer the next generation. He glares at Sehun with utter disdain, wholly unimpressed by the freshman's lean, unassuming frame. But Sehun stays silent and quietly hands over the heavy recommendation letter. Kwang-soo reads the name on the envelope and freezes in his tracks. The fact that the academy's top instructor personally sent this kid means he can't just throw him out. Annoyed and wanting to crush the kid's spirit, the retired legend grabs a wooden training sword. He offers a cruel, inescapable ultimatum. A one-round sparring match where the first person to land a clean hit wins. Kwang-soo takes his stance, his aura shifting entirely as he activates his signature relaxation technique. By removing all tension from his muscles, his body becomes an unpredictable flowing liquid, ready to deflect any strike. He fully expects the amateur to charge in blindly, hoping to parry a clumsy sword swing. But Sehun doesn't even bother striking. Instantly recognizing the legendary technique, Sehun drops his weapon and completely shifts his strategy. He dives right past the blade with a brutal, textbook grapple, unleashing the explosive gravity magic stored in his heavy bracelet to viciously slam the S-rank legend directly into the floor. The air in the dojo was thick with tension as the master stared down his two unruly students. Without a second thought, he ordered everyone out of the room. But the young regressor merely smirked, feeling the rush of a fight well fought. Word had already started spreading across campus. The elite top student of a Kalquif had actually been beaten by a mere Borsippa cadet. The blonde upperclassman could hardly believe the sheer audacity of the situation. Admitting defeat, he offered to set up a proper time for their promised lesson. A simple thank you was all it took to seal their new arrangement. But the master wasn't finished, dismissing the upperclassman so he could have a private word with the true anomaly in the room. Tossing him a wooden sword, he demanded to see the exact technique used in the recent duel. Gripping the hilt, his eyes sharpened into a deadly focus. In a flash, he lunged forward, closing the distance instantly. His footwork was a blur of calculated precision, but the master casually parried the strike, completely unbothered by the immense force. For a first-sight kill move, it lacked the true killing intent needed to finish the job. The concept was solid, the master admitted, but the execution was completely raw. In fact, it was so crude that the older swordsman threatened to break the limbs of whoever originally taught it to him. Still, he saw the raw potential hidden beneath the flawed movements, promising to mold a proper foundation for the boy's bare-bones technique. Realizing he had just secured his spot, the regressor casually confirmed his enrollment. With a respectful bow, he took his leave, his primary goal for the day accomplished. The master watched him go, silently noting the sheer arrogance of a kid riding the high of a top grade. Outside, his newly acquired upperclassman lackey was already running over to greet him. Without hesitation, the blonde handed over a dark, wax-sealed envelope. It was a direct invitation to noblesse, an exclusive gathering for the Academy's elite. Only cadets from high-ranking, powerful families ever stepped foot inside those halls. He stared at the seal, instantly suspecting that the manipulative Erica was pulling the strings behind this offer. His companion warned him about the obnoxious crowd but insisted it was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Laughing off the tension, the upperclassman considered this a small token of gratitude for getting to take the coveted class. Acknowledging the favor, the regressor accepted the invitation with a faint smile. As he walked away, his mind quickly shifted back to optimizing his schedule, planning out his minor courses. Curses, alchemy, enchantment, there were endless paths to power and he needed the perfect combination. Suddenly, a hand desperately clamped down on his wrist, stopping him in his tracks. He glanced back, his sharp eyes narrowing at the sudden intrusion. A pair of wide, frantic green eyes stared right back at him. The strange girl desperately demanded to know if he was the one who crafted the item she was holding. Panting and practically vibrating with chaotic energy, she eagerly offered to enchant it for him right then and there. A system notification suddenly flared to life, confirming a bond had just been established. This unhinged girl was none other than Leah Claudel. In his past life, she was a legendary figure who completely shattered the boundaries of the enchanter industry. A true genius among geniuses, capable of raising any weapons grade to mythical heights. And yet here she was, losing her mind over a rare grade piece of heavyweight ore. She began frantically analyzing the item, muttering about complex formulas. Tearing at her own hair, she agonized over the sheer number of possibilities rushing through her brain. There were simply too many enchantments to choose from, and she couldn't decide which one to apply. Unfazed by her eccentric meltdown, he casually told her to just do whatever she thought was best. Blinking in confusion, she questioned how he managed to achieve such incredible compatibility with heavy ore. Quickly regaining her excitement, she rambled on about resonance phenomena, her passion fully taking over. After introducing himself as a first-year top student, he calmly began walking away. Stunned by his youth, the third-year senior praised his insane talent. But before their conversation could go any further, a dark, imposing figure stepped into their path. The hostile student aggressively demanded a moment of his time, completely ignoring the senior enchanter. Taking a slow sip of his drink, the regressor flatly told him to speak his mind right there. Annoyed by the blatant disrespect, the intruder ran a hand through his hair, trying to contain his rising temper. He demanded a formal apology for the perceived disrespect shown to Lady Erica. A heavy sigh escaped the regressor's lips. He really didn't have time to deal with mindless lapdogs. The loyal servant firmly declared that this confrontation was his own decision, not a direct order. Leah couldn't help but let out a mock laugh, instantly calling out the absolute nonsense of that statement. Everyone in the academy knew exactly who held this guy's leash. The servant's eyes darkened, fury radiating from him as he prepared to teach this arrogant first year a brutal lesson. In the blink of an eye, he dashed forward, launching a violent, unprovoked attack. A massive shockwave erupted, but the regressor easily sidestepped the explosive force. He calmly mocked the attacker, shattering his delusions of being anything special. In a place like Babel, there were countless monsters far stronger than a mere servant. Enraged by the cold truth, the attacker screamed at him to shut up. Dark, shadowy mana exploded around the furious student as he unleashed his true power. A terrifying wolf formed from the dark energy, launching itself straight for the kill. But with blinding speed, the regressor caught the deadly strike barehanded. The force of the impact sent Leah tumbling backward onto the hard pavement. With a swift, brutal motion, he completely shredded the dark aura. He had instantly deduced the trick. The shadow wasn't pure mana, but an illusion cast through a hidden dagger. The servant gasped in pure terror, unable to comprehend how his secret weapon was exposed so easily. A wicked, predatory grin slowly spread across the regressor's face. He commented on the delicious sound the clash had made. His specialized weapon was already activating its horrifying trait, devouring the enemy's iron to generate extreme heat. The expensive hidden dagger was instantly corroded and melted down into raw fuel. Crimson energy flared around him as the taste of consumed power sent a euphoric rush through his veins. Licking his lips, he fully surrendered to the chaotic activation of the gluttonous iron. The bond imprint resonated, confirming the generation of mad blood from the devoured metal. Unleashing the pent-up energy, he triggered a devastating burst ring. The absolute kinetic force sent the arrogant servant flying helplessly through the air like a broken doll. The attacker coughed up a violent spray of blood as his body crumpled under the immense pressure. He crashed hard, the surrounding buildings groaning from the shockwave. Defeated and broken, he collapsed to his knees, utterly humiliated in the middle of the street. Leia watched in stunned silence, a nervous sweat drop sliding down her face at the sheer brutality she just witnessed. Completely ignoring the ruined student behind him, he casually turned back to the terrified senior. She blinked, still trying to process the absolute monster standing in front of her. Without missing a beat, he asked if there was a specific enchantment lecture she would recommend. Finding her voice, she nervously suggested seeking out a certain awesome senior named Leah Claudel, completely unaware he already knew exactly who she was. Walking through the quiet academy streets, Sehun's mind raced as he realized the freshman was responding at a level far beyond expectations. Without hesitation, he approached the shadowy figure, politely asking for a closer look at the dagger in her hands. The sudden request caught her completely off guard, and Erica spun around in pure shock. She stared at him, her eyes narrowing as she tried to gauge exactly how much this mysterious cadet actually knew. Sehun calmly took the weapon, turning it over in his hands to analyze its flawless craftsmanship. His eyes gleamed as he instantly recognized the complex anti-confiscation enchantment perfectly engraved into the blade's surface. The sheer quality of the weapon confirmed his suspicions. This was a medium crafted with incredibly high-level sorcery. Watching him closely, Erica wondered if he had somehow managed to create a counter-skill using advanced magical theory. She realized that Sehun wasn't just talented, his raw aptitude for refining techniques was easily an S rank or higher. And if his crafting was that flawless, she knew his potential for offensive sorcery was bound to skyrocket to an A rank very soon. Suddenly, a translucent blue system window materialized in front of him, confirming a direct connection had been established with his target. Sehun blinked in mild surprise, immediately realizing she had been spying on him while he dealt with that annoying underling earlier. A smirk crossed his face as he twirled the dagger. Her little espionage attempt had just handed him some excellent compensation. Later that day, Professor Kim In-cheol stood at the front of the grand lecture hall commanding the attention of the elite cadets. Leaning on his desk, Sehun sighed inwardly. He had been looking forward to this class, only to end up listening to basic theories he had mastered lifetimes ago. He tapped his fingers rhythmically against the wooden desk, waiting for the real practical demonstration to finally begin. At the front of the room, a chunk of solid metal suddenly began to warp and twist violently into the air. The professor explained that even if the base metal was identical, altering the mana array could completely transform its physical shape. The swirling vortex of iron hardened into a perfect geometric block, demonstrating how a blacksmith's control determined a weapon's absolute limits. The students watched in awe as the professor reminded them that a true artisan must fully grasp the hidden potential of the metal they handle. Sehun watched the demonstration with a critical eye, noting that the professor hadn't completely abandoned the old ways of magical refining. The rest of the class gasped in amazement as the dense chunk of iron solidified, radiating a faint, powerful hum of energy. The professor slammed 2 identical blocks of raw iron onto the testing desks, giving the top students a strict 10-minute time limit. Within seconds, both Hans and Sehun stepped back from their stations, effortlessly completing the first stage of the complex transformation. The professor nodded in approval, impressed by the speed and precision the 2 prodigies were displaying. A beautifully refined blue sphere hovered above Sehun's workstation, a flawless execution of the given mana array. Glancing sideways, Hans smirked arrogantly, utterly convinced that his own speed and technique would secure him an easy victory. Raising a finger, the professor projected the next challenge, a staggeringly complex, jagged mana array that looked nearly impossible to stabilize. While the other students panicked, Hans grinned with wild excitement, aggressively channeling his mana into the heavy iron block. He confidently shaped the metal, absolutely certain that his intricate array was perfect from every conceivable angle. But the professor's face darkened with severe disappointment as he called out the blonde cadet's name. Hans froze in place, a look of pure confusion washing over his face as he held his newly forged creation. A sickening crack echoed through the silent lecture hall, and Hans stared down in horror. The dark iron violently shattered into jagged pieces, the delicate mana array completely obliterating itself from the inside out. The professor coldly explained that the basic iron ingot lacked the structural integrity to withstand such a forceful high-level transformation. Because Hans had used the wrong processing method from the very beginning, the metal simply couldn't handle the stress. Hans stammered defensively, desperately trying to argue that he had followed the exact instructions written on the board. But the professor cut him off, sternly warning that if a blacksmith pushes a metal beyond its limits without restoring the array, the equipment will permanently deteriorate. He ordered the humiliated cadet to thoroughly examine the material's internal limits from now on, leaving Hans grinding his teeth in frustration. Glaring bitterly across the aisle, Hans refused to accept defeat, convincing himself that Sehun had simply gotten lucky by doing nothing. Ignoring the glaring noble, Sehun gently placed his hand over his own shattered fragments of iron. With a terrifying surge of controlled mana, the broken shards dissolved into black liquid, perfectly reforming into a flawless geometric shape. The entire classroom erupted into shocked whispers, completely baffled at how he achieved the very transformation the professor just claimed was impossible. Professor Inchiol's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as he stared at the young cadet standing calmly at his desk. Realizing his flawless execution was a bit too perfect, Sehun quickly played it off, intentionally making the professor misunderstand his technique. He demonstrated the dark, swirling transformation once more, maintaining a relaxed, almost lazy posture. The professor suddenly realized the truth. Sehun had meticulously adjusted the raw iron ingot sensitivity before the transformation even began. He remembered the legendary S-rank hero, the greatest blacksmith to ever clear the towers, and the incredibly complex formulas he left behind. For decades, that fundamental problem of transformation had remained completely unbroken by modern artisans. And yet, this first-year brat had somehow effortlessly bypassed a decades-old magical barrier right in front of his eyes. Recognizing a monster in the making, the professor immediately dismissed the class, singling out Sehun to stay behind. The late afternoon sun bathed the prestigious Babel Academy in a warm golden glow as the lecture hall finally emptied. Sehun casually walked down the empty steps, approaching the front podium to see what the veteran blacksmith wanted. With a heavy thud, the professor placed an ornate, secure lockbox onto the wooden desk, sliding it toward the cadet. Inside rested a breathtaking, glowing crimson flame gem, a rare, highest-quality ore pulsating with concentrated fire essence. The blue system interface confirmed its immense value, detailing its specialized ability to melt mixed ores into liquid form. The professor explained it was an entrance gift. If Sehun absorbed it, his personal crimson flame would be permanently and drastically strengthened. A genuine smile crossed Soon's face as he accepted the priceless artifact, knowing exactly how much time this would save his growth. Sensing an opening, the professor leaned forward, personally inviting the prodigy to join his exclusive elective course. Sehun's eyes gleamed with interest as he realized the offer was for the highly coveted weapon origin studies. It was widely known as one of the most prestigious and intensely well-funded classes in all of Babel. Staring at the professor's fiery aura, Sehun remembered his past life. He had never even heard the name Kim In-cheol before his regression. That dark realization meant this incredibly talented professor was destined to meet a gruesome, forgotten end in the original timeline. But right now, he was a rising star in the academy, and Sehun confirming his enrollment made him only the fourth student to be accepted. They shook hands firmly, sealing a powerful new alliance that would completely change the fate of the academy. The moment their hands connected, Sehun's hidden system hijacked the contact, aggressively extracting the professor's unique affinity. He successfully acquired the fire-infused iron trait, a high-rank metal property capable of storing intense flames internally. Later that night, sitting in the absolute silence of his dark dorm room, Sehun began to piece together a terrifying new theory. If metal traits could be forcibly extracted from a living person, then a human body could theoretically be forged and processed, just like a weapon. The only danger was the immense, violently conflicting clash of multiple attribute manas tearing the human body apart from the inside. For a delicate blacksmith who required absolute, surgical precision, that kind of internal chaotic feedback would be instantly fatal. That was exactly why normal artisans only handled a single attribute perfectly suited to their natural-born aptitude. But Sehun wasn't normal. He ruthlessly exhausted the suppressing mana within his body, holding the crimson flame gem directly over his heart. Stripped completely dry of his own defenses, his desperately starved body violently drew in the pure essence of the crimson flame. His ultimate goal was to forcibly construct a brand new, artificial mana circuit designed exclusively for handling the destructive fire. The glowing red energy seeped directly into his flesh, branding his very veins with the scorching heat of the highest quality gem. An explosive pillar of crimson energy erupted in the small room, threatening to incinerate everything in its path. Sehun sat perfectly still within the roaring inferno, mastering the blazing heat until the raging tempest finally submitted to his will. The system chimed beautifully, confirming that his crimson flame attribute had rapidly evolved from an F rank all the way to an E+. But the ultimate prize was the acquisition of the S-rank Body Refinement Divine Magic, a skill that turned his very flesh into an upgradable weapon. His stat window exploded with massive growth, his strength, endurance, mana, and agility all skyrocketing past their previous mortal limits. As the notifications cleared, his mind flashed back to the people who had abandoned, betrayed, and failed him in his disastrous past life. He realized that giving up simply because the required materials seemed too dangerous was a mistake he would never make again. Staring out into the cold night, Sehun swore a silent oath. Whether it was using a future ally or destroying a future enemy, in this life he would consume absolutely everything to reach the top. The sunlight washed over the Grand Academy, a beacon of prestige and pressure. Inside, the atmosphere was already heavy with expectation. The instructor's voice cut through the silence, sharp and demanding. He made it clear, today was the day to finalize their creations. These weren't just practice pieces, they were scheduled for real deliveries. Both on and off campus, the Academy's reputation was on the line. Whatever they produced today would set the undeniable tone for their entire first semester. He demanded nothing short of absolute perfection. Give it your all so you have no regrets, he commanded. A resounding chorus of obedience echoed back. But reality in the workshop was far from perfect. Sparks flew as amateur hands struggled with the heavy tools. The forge room was absolute chaos. It was a total mess of uncoordinated efforts. Smoke billowed from overheated stations. Amidst the frantic panic, one student stood apart. Lee Se-hoon stared down at his workstation, his expression deadly serious. His body was screaming in protest. The physical limitations of his pre-regression self were glaringly obvious. Misalignments plagued his muscles, throwing off his delicate balance. He gripped his tools, feeling the frustrating weakness in his current form. He knew he didn't have the luxury of taking it easy. Every second wasted was a step closer to failure. He brought the heavy hammer down with a deafening crack. Flames roared as the metal yielded to his relentless strikes. Steam hissed violently as he quenched the glowing steel. He inspected the blade, his eyes analyzing every microscopic flaw. He knew what needed to be done to fix the disastrous state of the weapon. This should be enough to fix it, he thought, calculating the precise angles. But the clock was merciless. He wouldn't have time to salvage the rest of the garbage pile. His sharp gaze hardened with resolve. He could easily secure a decent budget if he just half-assed all the items to a passable standard. It was the logical, safe choice. But pride and instinct refused to let him take the easy way out. It was infinitely better to forge a single masterpiece than a dozen mediocre failures. He adjusted his grip, his focus narrowing down to the raw iron before him. The whetstone scraped against the metal, a harsh but rhythmic melody. He began the polishing phase, stripping away the rough exterior. A brilliant white light sparked from the friction. The sheer intensity of his focus seemed to alter the air around him. The sound of his grinding echoed like the world itself was crumbling. Water splashed in slow motion, cooling the edge. A familiar thrill rushed through his veins. Whenever he heard that distinct resonant ring, he knew he had forged something truly great. He held the blade up, admiring the terrifying gleam. This wasn't just a temporary sharpness applied to the surface. It was a keen, deadly edge etched into the very soul of the blade. A satisfied smirk crossed his face. The system recognized his monumental achievement immediately. A blinding aura erupted from the finished weapon. The notification chimed. The armament white light greatsword had been completed. The text praised his impossible skill level. He had drawn out the absolute maximum potential from bottom-tier materials. He had officially surpassed the elite level. He acquired the rare white light style skill. The greatsword's stats hovered in the air, rare grade, high quality. A blade perfectly synchronized with mana circuits. Considering he had only used basic common iron, he deemed the result acceptable. To anyone else, it was a miracle. To him, it was just passable. He let out a long breath, wiping the sweat from his brow. Meanwhile, the rest of the class was falling apart. Students groaned, their cheap swords shattering against each other in testing. He watched them from the corner of his eye, feeling a quiet sense of triumph. His pre-regression skills were slowly, inevitably returning to him. Bit by bit, the master blacksmith was awakening. Across the room, a frustrated student cursed at his warped blade. "I really hate this," the boy whined, thoroughly defeated. The gap in skill was already becoming a massive canyon. The title card flashed. The regressor makes everything. The grueling Friday classes finally ended. The sun rose on a crisp Saturday morning. Sehun sat at a peaceful outdoor cafe, waiting. Footsteps approached, breaking the morning silence. "I'm surprised you actually wanted to see my enchantment process," a voice called out. It was Helena, adjusting her glasses with a curious look. Sehun looked up calmly. Well, I was curious about your fundamentals. The bustling city streets were loud and crowded around them. Helena led the way, promising her workspace was much more secluded. They walked for what felt like hours, leaving the city far behind. Isn't this a little too far out of the way? Sehun asked, observing the empty fields. The sky was vast and open, a stark contrast to the cramped academy. Helena smirked over her shoulder. Did you think my enchantments were that easy to get a look at? They finally arrived at a rustic, run-down wooden cabin. A faded sign hung above the door, Akalkuf's smithy. Dust danced in the sunlight filtering through the worn roof. We're here, Helena announced, pushing the heavy wooden door open. The interior was dark, smelling of ash and old magic. I'm back, she called out into the shadows. Pots and pans hung from the ceiling, clanking softly. An elderly woman emerged from the back, her face etched with deep wrinkles and zero patience. I'm not deaf, the old woman snapped, glaring at the intruders. Her sharp eyes immediately locked onto Sehun. Who's the kid? She demanded gruffly. Your boyfriend, she added, her tone dripping with suspicion. Helena flustered, waving her hands defensively. What are these people even talking about? Sehun thought, deadpan. He maintained his polite, unbothered smile. He's the top student from this year's Borsipa department, Helena clarified proudly. The old woman scoffed loudly, unimpressed. Babel is truly finished if they're letting in such a soft-looking brat, she muttered. Sehun stepped forward, introducing himself formally. Lee Sehun, first year in the smelting department. The grandma waved him off dismissively. Stop wasting time and get to work so you can leave, she barked at Helena. We've got a massive pile of work this week because of the useless freshmen. Helena sighed, used to the abrasive attitude. She gestured for Sehun to follow her toward the back. This way to the workshop, she said, leading him past the clutter. Sehun glanced back at the old woman as they walked away. His trained eyes noticed the subtle calluses on her hands and the way she moved. That old woman, her skills are even better than I thought, he realized inwardly. He looked around the cramped, seemingly mundane shop. I don't get why someone with her talent is running a hardware shop in a place like this, he pondered. They entered a dimly lit back room filled with strange tools. Helena proudly presented a large, multicolored case. Well, this is an enchantment palette, she explained. It looked like an oversized makeup kit but radiated intense mana. These are powders made from ground mana stones, she continued. Sehun analyzed the vast array of shimmering colors. He had heard the standard palette only had 8 colors, but this woman used an incredible variety, a sign of true mastery. He watched as Helena picked up a delicate brush. Is the job to restore damaged enchantment formulas with these? He asked. Helena nodded, preparing her tools. I get to earn money and practice my enchantments as much as I want, she smiled. All without worrying about the massive cost of materials. She dipped the brush and began to paint intricate lines of glowing gold onto a frying pan. The mana hummed, lighting up the dark room. Sehun watched her intense focus. He realized why she had really come here. She was in a severe slump, desperate to find her rhythm again. Her hands were slightly unsteady, burdened by recent failures. To think a guy who brings a failure to every exam, Sehun thought, remembering his own past struggles. He knew exactly what it felt like to lose your touch. But watching her work, a different feeling washed over him. Being able to lose yourself entirely in your craft, that level of pure immersion was a rare talent in itself. He looked down at his own hands. The familiar itch of the forge was creeping up his arms. He wanted to engrave his white light aura again. He needed to feel the metal sing under his command. If you're capable of it, that is, a voice echoed in his memory, challenging him. He turned toward a massive pile of unfinished weapons in the corner. Just pick any item from the pile over there, Helena had told him earlier. He sifted through the junk, his hands seeking perfection. You're really putting me to work, aren't you? He muttered. His eyes landed on a massive, heavy whetstone. If I get to use a custom whetstone of that caliber, he couldn't resist the temptation. He pulled a surprisingly well-crafted blade from the bottom of the pile. You're going with that one? Helena asked, glancing over. Sehun examined the steel closely. The edge is perfectly aligned and the axis isn't warped at all, he noted with appreciation. It felt completely different from the amateur trash at the academy. It feels like a blade belonging to someone who truly knows how to handle a sword. He carried the blade over to the sharpening station. For the whetstone, I'll take the one with the most evenly compressed mana particles, he decided. He poured water over the stone and began to grind. The rhythmic sound filled the workshop, steady and flawless. If it's this person, he thought, thinking of the sword's original owner, they should be able to handle it. He pushed the metal to its absolute limit, refining the edge until it was razor thin. From the doorway, the grandma watched him in absolute silence. Her eyes went wide, completely stunned by his flawless technique. He's really a freshman who just enrolled this year? She thought, her jaw slightly slack. Suddenly, the front door rattled open. "Oh, Grandma, when did you get here?" a deep, masculine voice called out. The old woman snapped out of her daze, instantly returning to her cranky persona. "Beats me, you brat," she grumbled, walking back to the front counter. In the back, Sehun wiped the blade clean, the metal gleaming with lethal perfection. The newcomer, a tall man in a suit, walked in, adjusting his glasses. He immediately noticed the freshly sharpened blade resting on the table. He picked it up, his eyes widening in shock as he felt the terrifying edge. "Sis, did you sharpen this while you were drunk again?" he asked the old woman, bewildered. She just smirked quietly. "I told you, it was a freshman who just enrolled this year." Walking through the campus grounds, Sehun listened carefully as his companion brought up an intriguing piece of gossip about a retired metallurgy professor. Curiosity piqued, he casually pressed her for more details, wondering if there was a hidden history behind the old woman's departure. Despite the imposing architecture of Babel towering above them, the reality of the situation seemed far more mundane than he expected. She explained that it wasn't an isolated incident, noting the steady exodus of talented educators from the department over the last decade. Sehun immediately recognized the severe implications, knowing full well that this mass departure would soon render metallurgy the weakest branch in the entire academy. It was a glaring vulnerability that couldn't simply be ignored, especially with the turbulent future he knew was approaching. Shifting the topic, the red-haired creator eagerly sought validation for her latest enchantment, her eyes practically begging for a compliment. He acknowledged her solid fundamentals but didn't pull his punches, bluntly pointing out the rigid, narrow scope of her creative vision. Her frustration flared as he diagnosed her fatal flaw. She was fully aware of better methods but stubbornly refused to apply them. The blunt critique struck a nerve, leaving her wide-eyed and momentarily speechless as the harsh truth sank in. Not willing to leave her in the dark, Sehun demanded her full attention, preparing to break down the true essence of their craft. She immediately focused, hanging on to his every word as he began his masterclass. Using a vivid analogy, he described forging as merely placing a stone beneath the water, while true enchantment was the art of carving its reflection upon the surface. To demonstrate, he manifested a brilliant crimson aura, the raw energy swirling around him with intense heat. The sheer power of the enchantment concentrated rapidly, glowing violently as it formed. He explained that true enhancement wasn't meant to sit on the exterior, but rather seep deep beneath the surface of the weapon itself. The blade shimmered with contained, deadly potential, transformed by the refined application of his mana. He elaborated on the mechanics, casually suggesting that if one layer of enhancement wasn't enough, she simply needed to divide and stack them. Channeling his magic into a simple dagger, he prepared to show her exactly what a layered enchantment looked like in practice. With a swift, practiced motion, he threw the blade, the infused energy leaving a dazzling trail through the air. The dagger slammed violently into a solid wooden post, sinking deep into the target with terrifying force. A sharp hiss echoed as the residual energy radiated from the embedded weapon, completely overwhelming its original structure. The lethal intent of the Crimson Lotus enchantment trickled down the wood, leaving a scorched mark of its devastating power. A subtle, satisfied smirk crossed Sehun's face as he watched the realization wash over his student. Her mind raced, rapidly analyzing the staggering depth of his technique, completely awestruck by the genius unfolding before her. Overcome with frantic inspiration, she practically begged to borrow the enchanted blade for her own research. Amused by her manic enthusiasm, Sehun agreed, but insisted she take something else along with it. He handed over a set of materials, fully supporting her sudden burst of creative madness. She erupted into joyful cheers, literally jumping with hearts in her eyes as she loudly declared her love for his generosity. Left behind in the quiet courtyard, Sehun simply watched her sprint away, shaking his head at the chaotic encounter. His moment of peace was interrupted by the system interface, confirming a successful connection and a level up with the eccentric creator. Turning his attention back to his actual objective, he observed the bustling academy grounds, mentally preparing for what was to come. The atmosphere inside the grand arena was electric, the crowd buzzing with anticipation to witness one of the legendary three hounds. Se-hun blended into the shadows, his eyes locked on the stage, fully aware that he was about to witness a historic clash of future titans. But his focus was constantly broken by the relentless black-haired girl trailing right behind him like a persistent shadow. Annoyed, he shot her a cold glare, directly challenging her stubborn refusal to leave him alone. Unfazed by his intimidation, she held her ground, leaving him no choice but to let her tag along as they entered the stand. Ignoring his unwanted companion, Se-hun subtly activated a specialized contact stone within his pocket. The crystal pulsed with hidden energy, silently executing its intended function without drawing any attention. The system instantly analyzed the artificial ore, breaking down its complex man arrangement and confirming its high-grade quality. A second notification validated his catalyst, proving he possessed the absolute highest tier of explosive materials. Suddenly, the booming voice of the announcer echoed through the Colosseum, officially welcoming the new students to Babel's Pride. The massive arena floor stretched out below, a perfect battlefield designed for the Academy's most brutal ranking matches. The vibrant host, Lan Fang, hyped up the eager crowd, her energetic tone setting the stage for the violent spectacle. A blinding spotlight snapped onto the stadium floor, illuminating the first combatant. The host introduced the reigning champion, a prodigy who had dominated the Martial Hall for 3 consecutive years. Arya Myers strode confidently into the light, her golden hair catching the gleam of the arena's illumination. Known as the Holy Sword Master and an active A-rank hero, her reputation alone was enough to intimidate most opponents. The crowd roared her name in absolute adoration, completely captivated by the heir to the prestigious Myers family. Arya flashed a proud, unshakable smile, completely unfazed by the pressure of defending her throne. While the fanboys in the stands lost their minds, Se-hun watched with a critical eye, thoroughly unimpressed by the idol worship. The spotlight shifted to the challenger, highlighting a dark silhouette at the opposite end of the arena. A dangerous smirk finally graced Se-hun's face as he laid eyes on his true target. Yom Seong-ha stepped forward, his piercing glare radiating pure, unadulterated madness. The rising star of the spear arts department gripped his weapon, his entire aura screaming for blood. Without a second of hesitation, Seong-ha launched a devastating, fiery assault, his spear clashing violently against Arya's blade. The impact triggered a massive explosion of scorching flames, threatening to consume the entire stage. Pushing through the inferno, Seong-ha relentlessly thrust his spear, aiming to overwhelm the champion with brute force. But Arya easily parried the heavy blow, her golden aura deflecting the raging fire with effortless grace. She immediately counterattacked, seamlessly transitioning from defense to a blindingly fast sword strike. The force of her parry sent Seong-ha skidding backward, his boots grinding against the arena floor as he struggled for balance. He clicked his tongue in deep frustration, completely unwilling to accept the gap in their power. Tightening his grip on the spear shaft, he forcefully ignited a fresh wave of blazing mana. Arya merely smiled, her golden eyes reflecting the flames as she confidently waited for his next desperate move. She stood perfectly centered within her radiant defensive barrier, completely untouchable. Refusing to back down, Seong-ha lunged forward once more, putting every ounce of his strength into a localized strike. His spear connected, triggering a concentrated blast of pure kinetic and thermal energy. He swung wildly, leaving trails of raging fire in his wake, trying desperately to break her guard. But with a light, evasive step, Arya easily bypassed his chaotic assault, rendering his power useless. Watching from the stands, Se-hun analyzed the boy's form, deeply disappointed by the incredibly sloppy technique. While Seong-ha's lack of support was obvious, Se-hun deduced that the real issue holding the prodigy back was his poorly crafted weapon. In a final, desperate gambit, Seong-ha threw his entire body into a forward thrust. But before the spear could even connect, the cold steel of Arya's blade was already resting gently against his throat. The raging fire in Seong-ha's eyes instantly died out, replaced by the crushing weight of total defeat. With a bitter sigh, he surrendered, quietly accepting his devastating loss. The system declared the sparring match concluded, as Arya offered a polite, almost condescending compliment to her fallen opponent. She stood tall and pristine, not a single hair out of place after utterly dismantling the rising star. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers once again, celebrating their undisputed champion's flawless victory. The energetic host attempted to transition into the post-match interviews, eager to capitalize on the hype. However, the segment was abruptly cut short as Seongha immediately stormed off the stage, leaving Arya to laugh off the awkward situation. As the crowd murmured about the harsh reality of facing the top rankers, Sehun had seen enough. Knowing exactly how frustrated the defeated spearman must be feeling, Sehun realized this was the perfect opportunity to strike a deal. He turned his back on the roaring arena and walked away, closely followed by his relentless shadow. He muttered his annoyance under his breath, still thoroughly irritated by the girl's constant presence. Descending the grand staircase into the quiet corridors, he prepared to intercept the angry prodigy. The black-haired girl taunted him from behind, questioning his foul mood while entirely missing the bigger picture. Back in the arena, amidst the cheering fans, Arya suddenly paused, her sharp instincts catching on to something unusual. She glanced over her shoulder, her golden eye locking onto the fading silhouette of a man walking into the shadows. A predatory smile touched her lips, completely intrigued by the presence of a freshman who felt far more dangerous than anyone she had just fought. The quiet breeze sweeping through the park near the martial arts hall was about to be disrupted. Sitting alone in meditation was a man who held a terrifying reputation in the future. A living legend, Yom Seong-ha. Even though his personality left much to be desired, his undeniable strength made him the very backbone of the notorious Death Squad. In the timeline that had already crumbled, he was a warrior who didn't hesitate to throw his own life away just to drag the archdevil of the Sea of Ruin down with him. Knowing the tragic end that awaited this powerhouse, the regressor hoped to change things this time around. Since the man hadn't yet gone completely off the deep end, acquiring his affinity stone peacefully seemed like a solid plan. Approaching the brooding warrior, he casually brought up the recent sparring match to break the ice. Seong-ha barely acknowledged him, giving a cold, dismissive response. Undeterred, the regressor complimented the senior's tracking skills, trying to establish a connection. But the praise fell on deaf ears, met only with a harsh, piercing glare. Seong-ha's hostility was immediate, clearly annoyed by the sudden interruption. He demanded to know why the top student of the Borsipa department was wasting his time. The regressor kept a calm smile, though internally he questioned the senior's extreme reaction. He smoothly explained that he only wanted to have a quick word. But patience was not one of Seong-ha's virtues. His eyes narrowed with clear disdain as he made his stance absolutely clear. He issued a final warning, refusing to repeat himself. The air grew heavy as the older student spat out his absolute disgust for the weak. To him, anyone who couldn't stand on their own 2 feet was nothing more than trash. He couldn't stand mediocre talents who deluded themselves into thinking they were equals. The message was clear, there was no room for negotiation here. He ordered the younger student to turn around and go home, completely shutting down the conversation. The regressor's expression hardened as the harsh rejection sank in. Calling the man a blacksmith in his mind, he realized the rumors of his terrible attitude were heavily understated. Still, compared to the mad dog he would eventually become, this version was practically a gentleman. In his past life, people had learned the hard way to just stay back and let the madman make his gear. With the hostility radiating from the senior, the regressor quickly accepted the new reality. A peaceful resolution was completely off the table. If words wouldn't work, he would just have to speak a language the older man understood. Stepping forward, the regressor made it clear he had absolutely no intention of backing down. The defiance sparked a dangerous fire in Seong-ha's eyes. The distance between them closed, the tension snapping like a tight wire. Since the junior wanted to be stubborn, Seong-ha decided to teach him a brutal lesson. He declared that the proud legacy of the younger student's spear techniques would end right here because of his own arrogance. Without a second of hesitation, Seong-ha launched a vicious strike. The sheer force behind the attack was meant to crush any foolish confidence. But the regressor didn't even flinch. He met the overwhelming force head-on, his eyes glowing with an eerie calm. A sharp shockwave ripped through the courtyard as the blow was perfectly deflected. Activating his unique affinity imprint, the regressor coated his body in an unbreakable defense. Seong-ha stumbled back, his eyes widening in pure disbelief. The junior had casually parried a punch fully infused with condensed mana. The regressor dusted himself off, smirking at the failed assault. He admitted that the senior wasn't a top student for nothing, the strike had real weight to it. The unexpected display of power completely shifted the dynamic of the encounter. Perhaps trying to beat some sense into the stubborn senior was the right call after all. Searing flames began to dance around Sehunga's fists, furious at the humiliation. The air grew dangerously hot as the residual embers of his mana ignited. He prepared to unleash the true, devastating power of his signature technique. Gathering every ounce of his burning mana, he aims to end the fight in a single fiery blast. The flames roared, threatening to consume everything in their path. He declared absolute destruction, convinced the younger student was finished. The strike surged forward, a blinding flash of destructive heat. But the devastating blow never landed. The blazing fire was violently redirected, completely missing its mark. The regressor stood perfectly unharmed, exhaling a calm breath amidst the scattering sparks. Seongha froze, his mind struggling to process the impossible sight before him. His signature residual embers, flames that should only answer to his absolute command, were swirling around his opponent. Panic and confusion washed over him as the stolen flames danced in the junior's palm. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His ultimate attack hadn't just been blocked. It had been completely parried and stolen right out of his hands. The regressor looked at the hijacked flames with an infuriatingly smug expression. His casual disrespect pushed the senior's fragile pride past its breaking point. A dark, oppressive aura erupted from Seongha as his rage completely consumed him. The regressor's eyes sharpened, recognizing the dangerous shift in the air. The senior was completely losing it, surrendering to the madness that would eventually define him. It was exactly this uncontrollable, explosive temper that would lead to a horrific massacre in the future. Sensing the imminent threat, the regressor prepared to end the clash decisively. His defensive buffs were running out, and his body was rapidly approaching its limits. If a peaceful connection was impossible, total subjugation was the only path forward. He decided to completely crush the senior before the madness could fully take root. Both fighters lunged forward, ready to settle things with a devastating final collision. The air cracked as their overwhelming forces prepared to meet. Just as their attacks were about to connect, a sudden blur interrupted the chaos. Someone completely unexpected threw themselves directly between the two brawlers. The regressor forcibly halted his strike, recognizing the familiar face that had jumped into the crossfire. It was Jake Myers, panting heavily and looking absolutely terrified. He desperately grabbed onto the regressor, demanding to know what he was doing. The tension shattered instantly as Jake frantically tried to de-escalate the situation. The regressor sighed, realizing the opportunity for a decisive victory was gone. Jake didn't waste a single second, immediately dragging his friend away from the enraged senior. As they retreated, Seongha stood alone, slowly realizing just how close he had come to a devastating mistake. His breathing was ragged, his hands trembling as the blinding rage began to fade. He cursed himself for losing his cool and letting a simple provocation push him to throw a reckless punch. In a moment of blind anger, he had almost completely ruined the proud reputation of his master's legacy. The bitter taste of his own lack of control gnawed at him as he stared at his shaking fists. Meanwhile, safely away from the courtyard, Jake finally let go, furious with his friend's recklessness. He aggressively scolded the regressor for picking a fight with someone so dangerous. In his eyes, jumping into a brawl with a senior was a guaranteed death sentence. The regressor just brushed off the frantic lecturing with a completely straight face. He calmly stated that the encounter wasn't life-threatening at all, just a little bit risky. But deep down, he couldn't hide his satisfaction as a glowing system message appeared before his eyes. Despite the chaos, he had successfully established the crucial affinity connection he needed. The next step of his grand plan was finally falling into place. However, he noted that the current timeline's version of the Mad Dog was surprisingly softer than he remembered. Because of this unexpected change in personality, the final effect of the Affinity Stone might not be what he originally anticipated. He needed a new strategy to artificially force the senior's affinity level to its maximum limit. Pulling himself from his thoughts, he suddenly noticed the calluses on Jake's desperate hands. For a supposed weakling, the guy actually seemed like he could be incredibly useful in the future. Brushing off Jake's concern, the regressor proudly declared that his hands were the toughest part of his entire body. Jake stood there, utterly dumbfounded by the sheer confidence of his reckless friend. As they walked away, the regressor casually shifted the topic to something much more important. He finally asked the question that had been lingering in the air: what exactly did Jake mean when he mentioned his big sister at the arena? Walking through the academy halls, Sehun's friend couldn't believe what he had just witnessed, completely stunned that someone as famous as Arya had actually taken an interest in him. But to Sehun, her bright smile in the noisy stands wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a calculated opportunity. He calmly explained his strategy, knowing that grabbing the attention of Yom Sengha's biggest rival was the perfect way to force his own presence into the spotlight. His friend, however, started sweating nervously, terrified by the sheer recklessness of the plan. He desperately tried to warn Sehun about Arya's true nature, hinting that her sweet exterior hid a chillingly petty and scheming personality. The mere thought of crossing her made his friend stammer, unable to finish his sentence. Sehun simply brushed off the warning, genuinely curious about what this girl could have possibly done to earn such deep-seated fear. But Sehun's mind drifted to the future he remembered, a timeline where the shining holy swordmaster Arya had abruptly abandoned her title, without a single word. In his past life, the radiant hero had vanished, replaced by an ominous shadow wielding the horrific remains of a demon god as her weapon. The holy sword she once carried had ultimately meant nothing to her, discarded the moment she embraced a much darker path. She hadn't just fallen from grace, she had become the terrifying demon god of annihilating light, bringing despair to everything she touched. Snapping back to the present, Sehun simply chuckled, deciding that he just naturally didn't like her face anyway. Leaving his terrified friend behind, he casually waved goodbye, entirely unbothered by the monstrous future he alone knew about. His friend stood frozen in the corridor, completely baffled by whatever invisible tension was brewing between the two geniuses. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with an incoming message, breaking him out of his confusion. His eyes widened in horror as he read the text, realizing he was being forcefully drafted into a dangerous game. A cold chill instantly ran down his spine. The message was unmistakably from Arya herself, using her sickeningly sweet tone to demand a favor from her helpless little brother. The next morning, the sun rose over the Grand Babel Academy, completely ignorant to the shifting power dynamics among its students. Sitting in the lecture hall, Sehun rubbed his stiff neck, briefly wondering if he had provoked Yom Sung-ha a little too aggressively the day before. Suddenly, the heavy doors swung open, and a miniature professor rolled in on a motorized cart, loudly commanding the room's attention. This was Professor Raid Doba, a man whose eccentric appearance completely masked his infamous reputation as an absolute lunatic in the forging department. Without wasting a second, he announced that the results from their previous major smithing class were finalized, along with their first semester budgets. The tension in the room spiked as the professor began calling cadets up one by one to receive their lifeblood for the semester. When Sehun's turn finally arrived, he stepped down to the podium, expecting a standard evaluation. Instead, the professor completely threw him off guard, plainly stating that Sehun didn't have a budget at all. Before Sehun could protest, the professor revealed that his piece was crafted so flawlessly that the faculty decided to throw it into the second year's open auction. His jaw nearly dropped as he processed the news. His entire semester's budget would be determined entirely by how much the senior cadets were willing to bid. Returning to his seat, Sehun narrowed his eyes, immediately suspecting that Vice Dean Michael was pulling the strings behind the scenes to test his true value. But before he could dwell on it, the professor smoothly transitioned to the day's lesson, introducing a temporary teaching assistant that made Sehun's heart skip a beat. Standing right there at the front of the class was Yom Sung-ha, the very senior Sehun had deliberately provoked just yesterday. Ignoring the awkward tension, the professor began the lecture, projecting complex magical diagrams to explain the volatile nature of residual mana in weapon crafting. He detailed the intricate differences between the basic charged types and the wildly unpredictable independent types that absorbed mana from the very air. As the professor explained the severe difficulty of creating an independent mana core, Song-ha stepped forward to provide a live demonstration. A dense, scorching crimson aura instantly erupted from the senior cadet's hand, radiating an overwhelming heat across the lecture hall. Fire element mana was notoriously violent and tricky to handle, making it a nightmare for standard blacksmiths to infuse properly. But Song-ha effortlessly bent the raging flames to his will, compressing the explosive energy into a perfectly stabilized ring of fire. The legendary flame wheel blossoming spear technique materialized before their eyes, a breathtaking display of raw power and pinpoint control. The entire class watched in stunned silence, completely mesmerized by the gap in strength between themselves and a true elite. Using the demonstration to set the bar impossibly high, the professor abruptly dropped their next assignment, challenging them to forge a weapon using these volatile concepts by next Thursday. Dismissing the lecture, the professor ordered everyone to head straight to the forge, leaving the cadets buzzing with adrenaline. Seeing their chance, a massive crowd of students immediately swarmed the podium, desperate to network with a high-ranking senior. They practically climbed over each other, showering Song-ha with praises, hoping to earn even a second of his time. But Song-ha's friendly facade instantly vanished as he shot them a venomous glare, coldly ordering the entire group to beat it. Terrified by his sudden shift in aura, the students scattered like roaches, leaving the lecture hall completely empty. Well, almost empty. Sehun casually strolled down the steps, completely unfazed by the senior's intimidating presence. As he tried to walk past, Songha sharply called out his name, his voice dripping with barely contained frustration. Stopping in his tracks, Sehun didn't even bother to turn around, waiting for the senior to finally take the bait. Songha demanded to know what Sehun really knew about his martial arts, specifically the limits of his flame wheel technique. The technique's mastery was strictly measured by the number of fiery wheels a user could maintain, with the current head of the gate proudly holding the record at 8. Sehun finally turned to face him, casually pointing out that Seongha had effortlessly held 3 wheels today, meaning he could easily push his limit to 6. Songha aggressively closed the distance between them, his eyes narrowing as he demanded to know what this arrogant junior was getting at. Sehun held his ground, his expression hardening as he prepared to strike at the senior's deepest insecurity. With brutal honesty, Sehun stated that Seongha had actually reached 7 wheels in the past, before suddenly losing the ability to summon them entirely. Songha froze, his heart pounding in his chest as panic set in. He had never told a single soul about his regression in power, not even his master. Sehun coldly broke down his observation, explaining that while Seongha's flames looked impressive, they felt artificially restrained, as if he was terrified to let the power truly explode. The senior was treating his own fire like a fragile toy, swinging it around half-heartedly instead of letting it roar. Trembling slightly, Songha desperately asked if Sehun actually knew what was causing this massive mental block. Sehun smirked, confirming that he had a pretty solid guess, but casually shrugged, claiming he had absolutely no reason to share it for free. Without another word, he turned his back and walked toward the forge, leaving a ticking clock in Songha's mind to make a decision before they reached the door. Unable to let his only chance at salvation walk away, Songha completely swallowed his pride and desperately asked Sehun to name his price. Smiling like a true businessman who had just hooked a massive fish, Sehun laid out his terms. Not only would Songha pay handsomely for every piece of advice, but he would now belong to Sehun as a permanent high-ranking informant. The room buzzes with doubt as the seasoned instructors demand proof of his ridiculous claims. But the regressor just smirks, completely unbothered by their lack of vision. Whispers erupt across the academy hall, questioning if he really plans to forge a masterpiece without a single blueprint. He ignores the noise, stepping up to the blazing forge with absolute certainty. With a heavy strike, he begins, effortlessly mixing the volatile fire and dark attribute ores. The instructors watch in disbelief, knowing that blindly mixing such opposing forces should cause all the elemental mana to violently dissipate. But his eyes track the microscopic changes in the metal, applying the exact amount of heat needed. He wraps his hands, perfectly syncing the roaring flames with his own internal mana flow. The forge erupts in a blinding light, absorbing the elemental energy instead of rejecting it. The head examiner gasps, realizing the boy is flawlessly executing the legendary technique of thermal displacement. The regressor smiles, knowing he has everyone right in the palm of his hand. While the amateurs see a standard forging technique, his true target sees the impossible happening right before his eyes. The bellows pump furiously, stoking the flames to an absolute zenith. Instead of clashing, the fire attribute mana spreads outward, while the dark attribute burrows deep inside. The elder instructor watches in stunned silence, finally understanding the sheer genius of the perfect elemental circle being formed. Songha realizes that this forbidden fusion is the exact solution to his own conflicting abilities. He admits the harsh truth: his power has plummeted, dropping him down to only the 5th flame wheel. But even with just 5 black flame wheels, the regressor knows it outclasses 7 ordinary ones. The problem is the looming threat of the Yomhwa sect's strict instructors who ruthlessly verify their successors' skills. If Songha can't manifest the 6th wheel by tomorrow, he'll be instantly stripped of his prestigious title. Falling back on his old safe methods isn't an option anymore either. The dark attribute mana inside him has grown too wild, violently rejecting his control at every turn. Panic sets in as he reveals the unforgiving inspector is arriving first thing tomorrow. The regressor calculates the stakes, knowing that losing the successor title means instant excommunication for his future ally. Pushed to the absolute brink, Songha clenches his fist in desperation. He grabs the regressor's shoulder, swearing he'll do absolutely anything if it secures his position. A dangerous, calculating gleam flashes in the regressor's eyes. He pulls out the ultimate trump card, an incredibly rare Crimson Resonance Blackstone, capable of harmonizing opposing manas. With a confident grin, he announces that to fix the martial artist, they first need to fix his weapon. He leads him to the Academy's most elite private training facility, accessible only to the absolute top rankers. Tapping into the room's holographic system, the regressor decides to set the perfect stage. In an instant, the high-tech walls dissolve, replaced by the towering traditional architecture of the Yomhwa sect. Songha looks around in shock, feeling a sudden wave of nostalgia hit him. The regressor explains it's a little trick he picked up, designed to push his allies' focus to the absolute limit. With the environment set, he gets straight to work on forging the customized training tool. Blazing fire mana dances across his fingertips as he shapes the raw energy. He flawlessly embeds the Crimson Resonance Blackstone right into the core of the new weapon. The system instantly registers the pinnacle tier item, confirming its ability to force internal mana to perfectly resonate. With a final, satisfying click, the ultimate training weapon is complete. Songha grips the dual spears, completely bewildered by the drastic change from his usual fighting style. But the regressor barks out his first order, commanding him to split his focus between his left and right hands. Taking a deep breath, the martial artist closes his eyes and channels his volatile energy. He swings with everything he has, unleashing a massive torrent of pure fire mana. But the moment the dark mana leaks out, the two opposing elements violently clash in midair. The recoil blasts him backward, leaving him stunned by the intense interference. He stares at the spear in shock, struggling to understand why his own power is fighting against him. The regressor calmly explains that years of forcefully suppressing the dark mana has caused it to instinctively rebel. Gripping the dual spears tighter, Songha realizes he has to completely rewire his instincts. The regressor promises that once his body gets used to the dual flow, breaking past his limits will be absolute child's play. Feeling the insane balance of the new weapon, Songha can't help but praise the first year's absurd crafting skills. With renewed burning determination, he launches into a relentless flurry of strikes. Every swing grows sharper, faster, and infinitely more controlled. The ground shatters beneath his feet as the once conflicting manas begin to weave together in devastating harmony. The regressor watches quietly, thoroughly impressed by the monstrous growth rate of his future subordinate. He analyzes every microscopic detail, wanting to see exactly why this man was a legend in his past life. He meticulously records his breathing patterns. He tracks the flawless shifts in his center of gravity. He observes the exact wavelength of mana violently erupting from the spear's tip. Songha pauses, thoroughly creeped out by the regressor's intense, unblinking stare. But the regressor just shrugs it off, claiming he's simply gathering the data needed to forge his actual final weapon. Sitting backward on his chair, he casually warns him not to expect a masterpiece from a mere first-year student. Changing the subject, he probes deeper, asking why Songha is so obsessed with keeping the successor title anyway. Songha doesn't miss a beat, pouring his entire soul into his next devastating swing. He states simply that it's his master's dying wish for him to lead the sect. As a loyal disciple, his only purpose is to see that will made into reality. The truth is, he was a nameless orphan, pulled from the gutters and raised as a son by the sect's legendary leader. Even though the great S-rank hero had retired after a crippling injury, his presence and absolute authority never faded from the martial world. To Songha, the man was both a strict master and the only father he had ever known. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Songha turns the question back, demanding to know why the regressor is going to such insane lengths to help him. A dark, knowing smile creeps across the regressor's face. He intends to conquer the 6 great demon realms, a nightmarish hellscape swallowed by the swamp of 10,000 demons, a place teeming with horrors that would make even veterans break completely. He casually states that to survive that slaughterhouse, he needs the ultimate meat shields to protect him. And more importantly, he needs a steady supply of high-grade demonic materials. Flashing a greedy gesture, he jokes that a sect leader needs to be dripping in both supreme skill and bottomless wealth. Songha sweats, completely taken aback by the kid's shameless, ruthless materialism. Leveling his spear, he demands to know if this is the absolute price for his help. Without a second of hesitation, Songha accepts the insane deal, vowing to march straight into hell and slaughter the demon gods if it means saving his sect. The regressor lets out a dark, satisfied laugh, loving how perfectly his pawn is falling into place. Holding up the glowing stone, he asks if the martial artist is truly ready to throw his life away for this. With eyes glowing with demonic intensity, he promises to force Songha onto the throne, even if he kicks and screams the whole way. And with a massive surge of dark energy, the Crimson Resonance Blackstone fully awakens, sealing their chaotic pact. The young spearman lays out his ultimate ambition, asking for the power to take over the Flame Gate. He makes a solemn vow, promising to brave the darkest and most dangerous regions of the world if he is given the right weapon. To seal the deal, he boldly claims he will even slay a demon god. The regressor merely smirks, entirely confident in the masterpiece he just forged. Holding up a glowing crimson orb, he assures the young master that the clan's top seat is practically his, whether he wants it or not. The stone pulses with an ominous, intense energy, radiating raw power. The regressor gives him one final chance to back out, asking if he's truly ready to commit to this dangerous path. Without a shred of hesitation, the spearman accepts his new reality. As the pact is struck, the system chimes, permanently locking their transaction through the resonance stone. With the alliance formed, the regressor's grand scheme finally takes its first major step forward. Back at the training grounds, Instructor Kang greets the young master with a thinly veiled, mocking smile. The atmosphere is incredibly tense as the two stand in the center of the sparring ring, surrounded by observant disciples. The instructor smoothly claims he brought the students here to broaden their horizons by watching the supposed future leader. But his polite facade cracks as he passive-aggressively reminds everyone that the next clan master hasn't actually been chosen yet. The young master's eyes narrow, a dark warning laced in his voice as he tells the older man to watch his mouth. Feigning ignorance, the instructor offers a sarcastic apology for his sudden slip of the tongue. Getting straight to the point, he suggests they immediately test the young master's so-called skills. But instead of agreeing to a simple, friendly spar, the young master declares he is officially applying for a 7th ring promotion. The bold declaration sends a shockwave through the room, completely silencing the murmuring disciple. Watching from the sidelines, an elder scoffs at the idea, warning his subordinates not to hold back against an arrogant kid eyeing the top seat. Another instructor questions if it's too early for such a dangerous challenge, but he is quickly silenced. The young master cuts through the chatter, asking if the instructor is terrified of losing his precious position. The instructor just laughs off the insult, calling for his weapon to be brought out immediately. The rules of engagement are laid out. This will be a pure clash of power where the stronger flame ring claims absolute victory. The tension spikes as the conditions are set. The young challenger only needs a draw or a win to secure his massive promotion. But the instructor's weapon looks incredibly intimidating, radiating a fierce, blazing aura that heats the entire room. He sneers at the young master's choice of weapon, mocking the crude, short spears he brought to a real fight. Igniting his spear, the instructor warns that filthy, dark attribute mana will never be recognized as a true flame ring in this sect. The young master remains completely unfazed, firmly gripping his newly acquired twin spears. The instructor demands to know if the boy has completely forgotten the clan master's strict orders to suppress his dark energy. Golden flames erupt around the older man, spiraling into rings of scorching, devastating heat. The young master casually challenges him to test that theory in actual combat. Enraged by the sheer disrespect, the instructor launches forward with a blinding, fiery strike. He swings his heavy spear down with terrifying momentum, aiming to crush the arrogant boy in a single blow. The massive impact sends a shockwave of golden fire tearing right through the training hall. The instructor expects a quick, brutal victory as his flames completely swallow his target. But his confident smirk vanishes in an instant as a terrifying, unnatural pressure violently pushes back against his attack. Black, jagged flames erupt from the young master's twin spears, completely overpowering the golden fire. The instructor stares in absolute horror as his own majestic flame ring is mercilessly torn apart. The dark energy morphs into a monstrous, roaring beast, brutally devouring the older man's flames like they were nothing. With a sickening crunch, the instructor's prized weapon begins to fracture under the insane pressure. The sheer force of the dark flames shatters the blade into useless, glowing shards. The once proud instructor drops to his knees, utterly defeated, disarmed, and humiliated in front of his own students. The young master stands victorious, calmly resting his spear on his shoulder as he looks down at his broken opponent. He casually asks what happens next, treating the shattered weapon like absolute garbage. With the promotion match definitively won, he confirms that he will soon be officially recognized as the formal successor. The regressor steps forward, reminding him of the steep, dangerous path required to actually take over the clan. The first condition is reaching the impossibly high threshold of the 8th ring. The second condition requires getting the full consent of the very instructors he just humiliated. Unbothered by the politics, the young master retrieves his weapons, completely confident that he can handle whatever comes his way. He points out that completely destroying a veteran instructor is proof enough that his ambitions aren't just empty words. The regressor brushes off the boasting, telling him to focus on how he's going to pay off his massive debt for the weapon. The young master doesn't hesitate, promising to provide top-tier materials and cash, whatever it takes. But then, he adds that he has another, much more important commission in mind. He admits that while the short spears are incredibly powerful, they were ultimately just a student's class assignment. Examining the hilt, he finally realizes the terrifying potential of his new mysterious ally. If the regressor could forge something this overwhelmingly destructive in just a few hours, he shudders to think what he could make with real time and resources. Looking directly at the regressor, he officially requests a truly customized, master-crafted weapon. The system pings immediately, confirming the massive leap in trust between the two powerhouses. The bond level skyrockets, solidifying their dangerous but highly profitable partnership. The system details the ongoing transaction, revealing how their mutual reliance will only grow stronger over time. The scene suddenly shifts to a massive, packed auditorium, buzzing with intense anticipation. A sharply dressed host takes the stage, energetically welcoming the massive crowd to the event. Sitting in the audience, the regressor notes that this massive turnout is highly unusual for a simple faculty auction. He knows exactly why he's there. His professor basically forced him to attend to keep up appearances against their rivals. The regressor stays hidden in the shadows, waiting patiently to see what moves his enemies will make while in the spotlight. He keeps a very close eye on the opposing faction, fully aware they are plotting to seize total control of the refining department. The host dramatically announces the theme of the auction, Iron Swords, with 36 weapons up for grabs today. To make things interesting, a special, highly disruptive quality verification process has been added to the event. A heavy textured cloth is draped over the testing block, ready to put the weapons to the ultimate test of survival. The host explains that this fabric is woven from the fur of an S-rank magic beast, making it softer than silk but harder than solid steel. He boldly claims that any sword that sacrificed true durability for cheap cutting power will instantly shatter against it. A test weapon is struck against the fabric, sparking violently before violently snapping in half. The host declares that this intense test will easily weed out the defective garbage from the true masterpieces. The first official entry is brought forward, a beautifully crafted cadet sword ready to face the block. The regressor watches closely, realizing that his opponents have set the stage perfectly for their elaborate trap. He knows the true hidden nature of the white tiger beast, understanding that its defensive properties are far more complex than just simple hardness. The fur actually actively mimics the sharpness of whatever metal it touches, turning a weapon's own offensive power right back against it. This means the sharper and more powerful the sword, the faster the fabric will ruthlessly eat away at its structural integrity. A fellow student leans in nervously, asking if his own massive weapon is going to be at a severe disadvantage. The regressor calmly agrees, knowing his great sword is the primary target of this entirely rigged test. As the auction drags on, cheap swords are sold off one by one, the hammer falling on generic, uninspired designs. Finally, the moment everyone in the room has been waiting for arrives. Sword number 36 is called to the main stage. The host hypes up the entry to the extreme, introducing the white light greatsword forged by the brilliant freshman valedictorian. The massive blade is unsheathed, instantly illuminating the room with a pristine, undeniable aura of power. The regressor glares coldly at the stage, fully aware this entire spectacle was designed solely to destroy his professor's reputation. But he remains totally relaxed, knowing he didn't forge his weapon with fatal amateur flaws. A powerful tester steps up, gripping the greatsword tightly and preparing to strike the indestructible fabric with his full, unbridled force. He winds up, putting every single ounce of his strength into the devastating downward slash. The heavy blade collides violently with the cloth, resulting in a blinding flash of light and explosive energy. As the heavy dust settles, a stunned, breathless silence falls over the entire auditorium, leaving everyone wondering what on earth just happened.